This is the Hagmann and Hagmann Report for today. It is Tuesday, August 13th, 2013. I'm Doug Hagmann, co-host, along with my son, Joe Hagmann. Together, we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, broadcasting in studio, both of us. This is a live broadcast. Folks, you're in for 3 hours of unbiased and uncensored news, analysis, and information that you need to know in these very perilous times. And I mean very perilous times. You're listening to the only show where the news is presented to you in three dimensions. We look beyond the headlines. We look beyond the bylines, the fog of the news, the fog of the lies, and bring you the news behind the news. New listeners, and I just want to say hello to Amy checking in from the Peach State, and a bevy of other new listeners. We broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern. You can find us at our home base on the internet at HomelandSecurityUS.com, and by the good graces of the Christians United Broadcasting Network, otherwise known as Cuban, C-U-B-N, we're simulcast there. You can tune in to us there at www. Remember when dots were periods? Anyway, the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com, the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. There is clean, crisp audio, studio quality audio at that location. I want to thank each and every one of you, Joe, and I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. Thank you for your belief and your trust in us. That's very important. We shall not squander that trust, because without that, we've got nothing. With that, Joe, busy night tonight, busy program tonight.
Yes, it is. Busy yet informative. We're going to get into a number of things. We got Stan Deo joining us in the second hour to talk about some of the things that have been going on, the sinkhole that collapsed at Disney Resort, the birds that have been dying across the world in different parts, dolphins washing up dead, volcanoes going off, floods happening in different parts of the globe, even here in the U.S.
So, situation normal across the earth.
About right. Earthquakes happening. There was a 6.7 in Panama today. Not sure the damage report there yet. And just a lot of changes going on. Natural occurring changes on top of the man-made occurring changes, like the preeminent war we're seeing in Syria. It's coming. We have news on that. But we're going to open tonight with a report. Michael Hastings was investigating CIA Director John Brennan named as being behind the witch hunts of investigative journalists. Troy's going to play an audio for us from San Diego 6 News. Local host there, Kimberly Dovark, says John Brennan was Hastings' next expose project, and they have received emails from the CIA acknowledging that Hastings was working on a CIA story. Stratfor email hacked by WikiLeaks, first published last year, names Brennan as being behind the witch hunts of investigative journalists learning information from inside the Beltway sources.
And I've got some comments to make specific on this that I have not said before, and I need to say them after the sound clip. Yep.
Okay. So Troy, whenever you're ready, we can go ahead and play that, and I'll post the link in the chat room, and you guys can see this, but the title of the article, here we go.
Ray, series premiere Thursday, October 7th.
And of course, you have to get the advertisement.
It's been looking into the death of journalist Michael Hastings in Los Angeles. This morning, she has some new information into what Hastings was working on just before he died in a fiery car explosion. Now, of note, the Hastings article is set to come out posthumously in a couple of weeks, we have learned. Good morning, Kim. Nice to see you this morning.
Morning. Thank you.
So you have new information about what Mr. Hastings was working on.
Yeah, I believe we have some sound on tape here from his wife on CNN earlier this week.
Okay, yeah, she made an appearance, Michael Hastings' widow. See if we can roll that.
I have no doubt that he was pursuing a hot story. He always had at least 5 hot stories going. That was Michael.
Okay, Perfect. Yeah, I believe the context of the discussion here is that Michael was working on a number of stories, one of which was centered on now CIA Director John Brennan. When he was the czar of counterterrorism for President Obama, he obviously was the architect of a lot of the drone strikes, Terror Tuesdays, some of these issues, and Hastings being an advocate for open information, as his wife goes on to state in the interview on CNN, that Mr. Hastings, wanted to get this information out and found it interesting background.
So this article is going to come out, we understand, in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be specifically about Mr. Brennan, is that correct?
Correct. Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, and a few weeks ago, some sources that I've been working with on this story and others gave me an email that surfaced through WikiLeaks, and that, of course, was an illegal hack. So we want to state that out front. That a lot of people on one side will say that this could be altered or whatnot, but it did spark a response from the actual CIA. This week as well.
Okay, so here's the emails. Now, this is from Hastings' colleague, correct? You got this from one of his co-workers.
Yes, at Project DM.
And explain who Mr. Burton is, please.
Mr. Burton is the now president of Stratfor, which is a major defense contractor for the U.S. government.
Okay, and here is the email that says, Brennan is behind the witch hunts of investigative journalists learning information from inside the Beltway sources, and it goes on to say, note there is specific tasker from the White House to go after anyone printing materials negative to the Obama agenda. And this is from a gentleman, you say, that has defense contracts in Washington?
Yes, indeed he does. And this email was directed towards Mr. Brennan, which prompted San Diego 6 and myself to reach out to the CIA just to get confirmation, in which they did. They promptly returned emails and a phone call to ensure that they knew Mr. Hastings. They were saddened by his death. They were aware that he was working on stories and that they had a very cordial working relationship.
And we have that email from the CIA. If we could bring that up and show exactly what the response was. Here's the media spokesperson from the CIA, Todd Ebitz. And there you can see, without commenting on information disseminated by WikiLeaks, any suggestion that Director Brennan has ever attempted to infringe on constitutionally protected press freedoms is offensive and baseless.
So there you have it. You have both sides of the story, and we let the viewers decide what they want to believe in all of this, and we'll wait and see what's going on with Mr. Hastings' story when it comes out in Rolling Stone.
It should be pointed out that Mr. Hastings' widow did make a television appearance saying that any suggestion that this was intended, his death was intended, is not correct, that his death was a tragic just a tragedy. That there was
she wasn't threatened.
Involved. Do you?
Yeah, and she went on also to explain that the LAPD has an active investigation. She's waiting with the rest of us to find out the specific details with that, and we're hoping to get information from a toxicology report that should be forthcoming here in the next maybe month or so, maybe 6 weeks. It's been quite a while. So I believe that we'll have a lot more answers. But the other piece of new information we have is when we saw the surveillance video last week, the black and white, there was a little bit of question as to how fast the car may have been traveling. We spoke with a San Diego State professor here, and he stated that it's his belief that when you do the calculation, the time and distance, the car was traveling roughly 34, 35 miles per hour when it hit the tree. So
slow down.
Well, I know you've gotten a lot of comments on your reporting on this story particularly, and we appreciate all the work that you've been doing.
Absolutely.
Trying to uncover some facts.
Yeah, and we couldn't do this without all the viewers. The tremendous amount of emails we've received are just, it's overwhelming. We read them. We do get tips. So check the KD report and San Diego 6, and we'll have the latest. Thank you.
Okay, Kim. Thank you very much.
Some real journalism here in America. I wonder if Dianne Feinstein would say that they're protected under the media shield law. And 34 miles an hour, you don't see too many cars survive driving down the street at that rate of speed. Usually doors are flying off, if you have any loose items like your antenna, sunroofs. That's a high rate of speed for a car 34 miles an hour.
I did.
School zone.
I did hit, Joe. I did hit another car, and I was going 30 miles an hour when I hit that other car. And I will tell you,
yeah, I remember.
It is devastating at 30 miles an hour.
Well, when the other car stopped and you're not looking ahead, yeah.
Well, it
or
did happen.
Up.
Or buckled up.
But the problem isn't how hard the car hit the tree. It's what happened to the car before it hit the tree.
Right.
It's John Brennan being involved in this, and it's the girlfriend saying up and down.
The wife.
I'm sorry, the wife saying up and down, don't hint of any foul play here. It was like she was an on-scene trained investigator of what happened. That's a little too fishy for me.
Well, let me just tell you, ladies and gentlemen, what I want to tell you, or what I know, what I've been told, and you'll have to you'll have to trust me on this, because otherwise, I cannot give you evidence at this point, or what you would consider evidence, but I can tell you this: what's going to appear it will not cover what Mr. Hastings was working on. It's true that he was investigating John Brennan. At least that's information I have from a source who was investigating this. The topic was John Brennan, but it wasn't the Terrorism Tuesdays. It was not about the drone strikes necessarily. I want to be very careful here with how I say this. There is a much greater issue with John Brennan that has to do with his activities from 2008. I'm going to say late 2007, mid-2007 to be precise, through 2009. That there's an overlap when he was a defense contractor, head of a defense contracting company, national security advisor to Obama. Please listen to me carefully. This is much bigger than the drone issue. This is much bigger than the Terrorist Tuesday, the meetings every Tuesday when the counterterrorism meeting of 24 security officials in the White House Situation Room would take place. This is not the true story here. Is not about the drone strikes. It's not about the architecture of the drone program. It's not about the kill list. Well, I should say it's not only about the kill list. Remember, we had in the early 70s a president who had an enemies list. And that president was resigned from office. This is much larger, by exponentially larger than that could ever be. There is, and I'll just tell you right now, there are dead people, dead Americans in the wake of the program we're talking about here, or the initiative or activities we're talking about here. Dead journalists, there are dead witnesses, and there are dead people that have died under mysterious circumstances or murdered with respect to, again, I'm trying to be very careful here, with respect to certain activities that took place from mid-2007 through 2009. That includes, but not limited to, the passport break-in office, the passport, the virtual break-in of the passport records. That perhaps is the most important part of this, or one of the most critical components of this.
There's a lot to look at here, as we see, him, and there will be a story coming out, as you heard in the video there. They are going to release his story. One, is it going to be watered down? Is it going to be the original text that he wanted to put together?
Yes, no.
Okay. And then second, what's Terrorist Tuesdays? That's something we heard in the video.
Right.
I mentioned it before the show. We didn't get a chance to talk about it. Somebody else in the chat asked, what is that?
Tuesday meetings, regular meetings, Tuesday counterterrorism meetings, usually consisting of a couple of dozen security officials in the White House Situation Room. That's what Terrorism Tuesdays are, to name the targets for drone strikes, name the targets for actionable termination. That's what Terrorism Tuesdays are. Simple as that. It's just a star chamber, okay, of people. But that's not what this is all about.
I want to say hi to Susan Price. I see her in chat room. She sent us some emails on John Brennan and his attachment to the New World Order. And those are some documents we're going to have to go through. But, yeah, we know John Brennan is not a good man. Was the head of the counterterrorism task force when he gave that speech talking about we're not at war with Al-Qaeda, we're not at war with Muslims. I forget how he worded it. It was a very oddly worded speech. Then he was involved in some things, and that earned him his way into being the head of the CIA.
John Brennan's been around a long time.
Yeah, and there's talk that he's was involved in some elements of Benghazi. And
John Brennan had his own secret army in eastern Libya, including Benghazi. For 25 years, he worked with the CIA. Now, folks, you got to understand where this guy came from and what he was doing. This is critical to understand. Currently, he is the head of the CIA right now.
Yeah.
Okay, now, folks, I'm going to be doing an article on this. Boy, I'm going to be doing an article on this. I mentioned him in a couple of articles about Benghazi. If you search Benghazi on Canada Free Press or HomelandSecurityUS.com, I did get into. In fact, it was in September of last year that I did an article tracing the relationship between the Innocence of Muslims video to Benghazi, to John Brennan. Think about that. Where did that video come from?
And speaking of that video, there was a report today. Filmmaker blamed for Benghazi attacks speaks in first TV interview. In his first television interview since being released, the filmmaker who produced the YouTube video blamed for inciting the 9/11 attacks in Benghazi urged the Obama administration to be more careful in its assessments in the future. He was released from Texas jail last week after serving an 11-month sentence and is currently living in a halfway house where he said the government is currently hiding him. Before you do anything, please give yourself time to think about it. Mr. Nicolia advised the administration on Tuesday in an interview with CNN Jake Tapper. Nicolia said he was shocked when he first heard reports that his film had triggered riots, but added that he does not blame the president for alleging his film incited protests outside of American diplomatic facility in Benghazi that preceded the attack on the building and the murders of 4 Americans. We need to make a separation between the president and the administration, he said. When asked if a grudge against former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, however, or whether the administration claims now wildly debunked put his life in danger, he declined to comment. Just days after the last year's September 11 attacks in Benghazi, Libya, Nicolia was arrested and charged with a parole violation in a bank fraud conviction. President Obama, Clinton, and the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Susan Rice, blamed his film for the attack. And we now have learned that that was a complete lie and fabrication of all the highest order, a deception of the highest order. As Susan Rice went on all these TV shows running around telling people that was the reason that he was in jail, or in jail, that was the reason that the killings happened in the first place. But what happened was a coordinated military attack on a gun-running operation being conducted by multiple nations, including the America through the CIA and the Obama administration.
Exactly. And at the epicenter of all of this is John Brennan. Don't forget, folks, John Brennan was the director of the National Counterterrorism Center for 2 years, from 2004 through 2005. He left government service. Now, he was with the CIA before that. Then he left government service, becoming chairman of the Intelligence and National Security Alliance, and the CEO, and this is critical, ladies and gentlemen, the CEO of the Analysis Corporation. Okay, remember that, because that is the key. If you look at the digital fingerprints for the distribution of the film Innocence of Muslims, you will see certain digital fingerprints that lead to, in my view, in my investigative opinion, to elements within or at the periphery of the Analysis Corporation. Moving backward in time, if you look at the passport office break-in, there were 2 companies and 3 individuals involved in the records breach of the passport office. One of those companies was headed by John Brennan. This is the story I believe that Michael Hastings was working on at the time that he was murdered. And I will say, I believe he was murdered.
I do agree. I think he was murdered also. I'm going to play jumping stories here. I'm going to play a quick clip from Russia Today. Unconstitutional. A federal judge slams down stop and frisk. It's a 6-minute audio, but I'm just going to play the first few minutes. Here it is.
Well, a major federal court ruling out today will have huge ramifications for the New York Police Department's controversial stop and frisk policy. Federal Judge Sharia Schindlin handed down a 195-page decision that says New York's finest have violated the constitutional rights of minorities for years. Here's part of that ruling. The city acted with deliberate indifference toward the NYPD's practice of making unconstitutional stops and conducting unconstitutional frisks. Even if the city had not been deliberately indifferent, the NYPD's unconstitutional practices were sufficiently widespread as to have the force of law. In addition, the city adopted a policy of indirect racial profiling by targeting racially defined groups for stops based on local crime suspect data. But while this ruling is a major victory for opponents of the stop and frisk law, it does, however, fall short of repealing it altogether. To talk more in depth about what this ruling actually means, I'm joined now by Carl Dix. He's the co-founder of the Stop and Frisk movement. Hi there, Carl. Thank you so much for joining me. So you are one of the people that thinks that this ruling falls short. Why is that?
Yeah, it doesn't go far enough, because what stop and frisk is it's a policy of treating Black and Latinos, especially youth, as criminals, guilty until proven innocent, if they can survive to prove their innocence. And that's not just me trying to hype this up. Marley Graham was a stop and frisk that went fatal. He's dead, and the cop is now free to walk the streets. So that's why this policy was no good, was illegitimate, and it needed to be gotten rid of. This ruling is not any reason for us to stop our resistance, not only to stop and frisk, but to mass incarceration overall, and all of its consequences, including the criminalization of black and Latino youth.
Now, Carl, part of this ruling requires a monitor to oversee the stop and frisk actions undertaken by the NYPD. Already, former Assistant District Attorney and NYC Lead Attorney Peter Zimroff has been selected for the job. Do you think that this monitor position will have an effective check and balance kind of effect on the discrimination that the judge alleged?
Well, I think that if the monitor is acting under the direction of the Justice Department, then I have a problem with it, because the Justice Department has presided over racial profiling, law enforcement targeting black and Latino.
Okay. The stop and frisk policy ruled unconstitutional to a degree there in New York, but I doubt that will stop the how things are done in New York City. As we know, Mayor Bloomberg is a nanny state governor or mayor who will take away any citizen rights he can while he is in power. A couple other stories I'm going to hit real quick here, and then give it back to my dad as he has something he wants to add back on the Hastings story. White House denies DNI Clapper will head independent NSA review after insisting that the government's unprecedented capability to monitor communications must be assessed by an independent panel. With regards to maintaining the trust of the Americans, President Barack Obama has announced the formation of a new review group. A memo issued Monday by the White House, James Clapper, the United States Director of National Intelligence, is to form a review group to determine if the U.S. employs its technical collection capabilities in a manner that optimally protects the national security and advances our foreign policy while appropriately accounting for the other policy considerations such as the risk of unauthorized disclosure and our need to maintain public trust. However, in a confusing turnabout, the White House said on Tuesday that Clapper is not heading the independent review. Director Clapper will not be a part of the group and is not leading the directors, or is not leading or directing the group's efforts. This Calatin Hayden, a White House spokeswoman, told the Hill reporter Tuesday. The White House is selecting members from the review group, consulting approximately with the Intelligence Committee. Now, this was an issue because he was got caught lying to Congress, this Clapper. And in another story here, and then we got news on Syria. Not a single person showed up to the Georgetown waterfront Tuesday for Climate Change Agenda event put on by the Organization for Action, the shadowy nonprofit advocacy group born out of President Obama's 2012 campaign. The event page for the Climate Change Day of Action rally disappeared after rainy weather appeared to drive away whatever people planned to attend. One volunteer stayed. 0 people showed up. 0 people showed up at the rally for the president's action on climate change. And one last story on Syria here. This is from the Debka file. Dempsey in Israel, Jordan to tie last ends before Obama decides finally on U.S. military action in Syria. The chairman of the U.S. Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, arrived in Israel Monday, August 12th for critical talks with Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yalong, and Chief Staff Benny Gantz, following by parallel talks in Jordan. Debka file reports he has come to lay the ground ahead of President Obama's final decision to embark on the limited U.S. military intervention in the Syrian civil war. The Obama plan, if it goes forward, would involve Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Israel, Jordan, and possibly Turkey.
Okay.
And they talk about U.S., British, French, Saudi, United Arab Emirates would institute a no-fly zone over central and southwestern Syria, stretching from the Jordanian-Israel borders up into Damascus. 2, the Israeli Air Force would provide these forces with air cover from the Syrian airspace. A 40-kilometer deep military buffer would be drawn in the Jordanian-Israel borders up the southern and western outskirts of Damascus. The military units controlling the zone would be held in the entire area of the capital within the artillery range. The southern Syrian town of Dera, where the Syrian uprising sprang up, will be declared capital of liberated Syria. Obama has determined that there will be no American troops in the buffer zone or anywhere else on Syrian soil, only special Syrian rebel forces. Those forces will consist of 3,000 fighters trained in Jordan by the U.S. military instructors and will be headed to Jordanian special forces and operated under the U.S. officers' base in Jordan. So basically, Al-Qaeda will be taking orders from the United States operating base. And it goes on. The list goes on.
Well, I think this is of critical importance because what we see happening here is the initiative in Benghazi, the largest weapons arms running operation in the history of modern times. Of course, that was a speed bump after it was exposed for what it was. Now, now the media is coming out and saying, of course, it was a weapons running operation. We said that back in September. But the most critical part of what Joe said here is the fact that this regime, the Obama regime, coupled with Saudi, Qatar, and even British and French interests, are moving forward to topple Assad. Folks, understand that the anti-Assad rebels are, without any external assistance, would be wiped out, completely wiped out. They're reaching now a critical moment in time where, and this is the run up to World War III that I've been talking about, that we've been talking about. Without assistance, the anti-Assad rebels would be just completely wiped out, and it would be nothing more than external intervention, like I likened it to the Bay of Pigs in the early '60s with the Kennedy administration. Those particular anti-Castro group of fighters they depended on American intervention, but never got it. Kennedy would not take the bait that was being provided to him. Therefore, they failed and were killed. They were annihilated. That's what's happening here, or would be happening here in Syria, if there was no external intervention. The external intervention is going to take place, as Joe said, and therefore we're going to see World War III because of this, because Syria will not implode but explode, and right now you've got over 100,000 dead and 1 million refugees in Syria alone. That those numbers are going to just go exponentially higher as the Western intervention and the Saudi intervention and the Muslim intervention is going to push for the overthrow of Assad. This is going to take place most likely concurrent with the actual killing of the U.S. dollar, as Geithner had indicated to Kyle Bass back in an interview a couple of years ago. That's the important part of this situation, and this is something that people have to really pay close attention to. And I was on Coast to Coast at 1 o'clock this morning, my time, and talking about the embassy closures. This relates to what we're talking about here. If you draw a map of the 22 embassy closures, if you draw a map, or if you look at a map, most of those embassy closures were where, ladies and gentlemen? They were in the Persian Gulf area. In fact, it looks like a crescent moon of dots along the western part of the Persian Gulf. A very small percentage, actually, of the embassy closures actually were a minority, were located in Muslim countries, the very locations where you would expect some sort of threat. No. So what took place? What was going on in that area that would warrant the closure of the embassies and movement of assets? Was this embassy closure because of to justify the NSA? No, I don't believe that for a moment. That could have perhaps a tangential effect, but it certainly was not the intended purpose for the embassy closures. Folks, please understand, because this is critical to understanding, critical to watching the next global conflict play out. This is part of it. But, Joe, allow me just to go back to Hastings and Brennan, if I might, just for a moment. Let me be a little bit clearer, because correctly, Joe said, my goodness, you sound like you were having a stroke when you were talking. And really, I did, because I wanted to be very careful in my wording. But I did pull up some notes here. And here's the situation as I will be writing about it. Perhaps those are some ill-advised words to say, given the evidence about people saying, "Hey, I've got a hot story I'm working on." Well, this is already in the hands of other people, and is going to be published regardless. But let me just say this: what might appear in the Rolling Stone, and I've got no idea what might appear in the Rolling Stone or what will take place. Here is the nuts and bolts of this, in my view, as a professional investigator. If you go back to September 24th, 2012, I wrote an article called Body of Lies from Benghazi to Barack. Folks, in fact, I might repost this or cite this heavily when I publish this next article, but this is the crux. I believe this is the reason. What I'm about to tell you is the reason, or is let me just rephrase that. This is what I'm about to tell you is what I believe is what Mr. Hastings was working on at the time of his demise. If you look at the video, the trailer, the 14-minute trailer that everyone was pointing to as the cause of the violence in Egypt and in Benghazi, we know that it wasn't. We know that it wasn't. It was some obscure video. We've talked about this before. But where did this video come from? Who are these people? Who financed this video? Where did this money go? Because it certainly didn't go into pre, mid, or post-production of this video. And it certainly was interesting that this video was shown in a theater in a situation where there were no attendees. But let me back up here. Based on my investigation, I believe...
It's like having a climate change rally when nobody shows up.
Kind of, sort of.
Okay.
Except, yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
But that was an event marker. In other words, they had to do this. They had to show this film at this theater to give it this sense of legitimacy. But no one showed up, and it didn't matter, because they just had to have that theater rented. They had to have this done. If you remember, folks, back then, and I wrote about this, where there were people actually passing out pamphlets. Some of the pamphlets were written in Arabic to get people to attend the showing of this movie. No one did. There were two showings scheduled at this theater in Los Angeles, and ultimately they had to cancel the second showing, which really didn't matter. That was on Saturday, June 30th, 2012. On June 29th, 2012, we find that a regular to the Los Angeles City Council meetings, a man identified as John Walsh, lives in Hollywood. He operates a blog site. He participated in the Los Angeles City Council meeting, and 2.5 hours into the meeting, in the archive footage, this can be found in the archive footage of the Los Angeles City Hall meeting, he gets up and simply asks rhetorically whether the neo-Nazis are coming to Hollywood, and directs the council members to his blog that references the showing of this movie the following day, the next day. Now, on Saturday, June 30th, 2012, now the accounts are kind of sketchy and conflicting. Based on the information we obtained from a man named Steve Klein. Joe, you remember us interviewing Steve Klein that
yes,
one
I do.
Interesting Sunday night?
The interview that nothing came of it.
Right. Well, yeah, it was one of the most bizarre interviews we have ever done. Anyway, he is the self-proclaimed spokesman for this film. Now, he was a guest on our program on September 23rd, 2012, for 90 minutes when we got no answers from him. The showings, as I reported just now at the video, the theater, no one showed up. This was a theater in Los Angeles. That was June 30th, 2012. The next day, well, actually during the night on the 1st of July, 2012, the title of the video went from The Innocence of Bin Laden, which was the working title at the theater, to The Innocence of Muslims. That was changed and placed on the YouTube channel that hosted the trailer. The video was hosted on an account under the name Sam Basile, who was actually determined to be Basile Nakula, which you referenced, Joe. But here's where it gets a little bit screwy.
You mean like it hasn't been already?
Well, yeah, and folks, I will have this article done here. Trust me, it's critical that I do get this article out because of this newest revelation. Bottom line here. If you trace the video on the internet, you will see that it is connected to it appears to be connected to a news website called News Politics Now. There's various names that the News Politics Now hold on a second, folks. I don't know, Joe. I don't know the answer to that question.
Sorry, guys. We're waiting for a call from somebody, and there's a area code that's not the same.
No, it would be the one that you. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt you.
That's all right. That's all right. Anyway, the video itself appears to have its associations with a news website, News Politics Now, based on digital fingerprints. If you look at the various incarnations of the internet video that allegedly caused all of this violence, if you look at News Politics Now and its name variations, it appears possible, and I'm being very careful here, that it appears possible to be linked with a company called Stanley Incorporated, which is now known as CGI. It appears that there is a link to this company as a defense contractor or a company that provides products and services to the United States military, the U.S. Department of State, and DHS. So you've got a video that is on a YouTube channel that has connections to a news site that has connections to a company called Stanley Incorporated, which has connections to the defense contracting, the defense contractors. The second part of this, it looks like, based on my evaluation, that this innocence of Muslims, there is a connection between the innocence of Muslims and Stanley Incorporated, as I said before, who was awarded a $164 million contract to print new passports in 2006. Well, remember, 2 employees of Stanley Incorporated, along with a third individual employed by another defense contractor. You want to take a guess at the name of that defense contractor? It was the Analysis Corporation, under the management ownership of John Brennan, who were identified as the perpetrators who breached the records office of the U.S. Passport Office in 2008. They improperly accessed the passport records of Obama, Hillary Clinton, and John McCain. The breaches took place on January 9th, February 21st, and March 14th, 2008, before Obama was president, or before he was elected president. In fact, before he was not, he actually had the nomination. So you're looking at John Brennan as the man behind the Analysis Corporation, during which time one of the employees of the Analysis Corporation was identified as one of the perpetrators who breached the records of the U.S. Passport Office. But it gets worse, and it gets deadlier, because if you recall, a guy by the name of Lieutenant Quarles Harris Jr., lieutenant being a first name, not a rank, during the investigation, you see, the passport records were breached. The Washington Times reported that officials don't know whether information was improperly copied, altered, or removed. Think about those words: copied, altered, or removed from the database during the intrusions. As time progressed, the leaks did as well. It was reported that at least one employee with the U.S. within the U.S. State Department shared passport information with who? Lieutenant Quarles Harris Jr. Well, Lieutenant Quarles Harris Jr. was scheduled to meet with detectives from D.C. on April 18th, 2008. It was an appointment he did not make. He was unable to make, because on April 17th, 2008, a month after the breach, and less than 24 hours before he was going to meet with detectives, he was found in front of the Judah House Praise Baptist Church in Northeast Washington with a bullet in his head. And by the way, that murder remains unsolved. Folks, I'm going to tell you right now, this is exactly what Mr. Hastings was working on at the time. In my view, in my opinion, this is exactly what Mr. Hastings was working on at the time of his death. Anything less than that, I would have suspicions. Anything less than that published, I would look back at the template of Breitbart. Remember what Mr. Breitbart was going to do. He was going to blow this case wide open. He was going to come out with some important information, and he passed away, or perhaps was murdered. I believe he was murdered. Now, what were the revelations on Breitbart? Were they earth-shaking? Were they historic in proportion to what was being said? No, not at all. Do I think that this is going to be the same with Mr. Hastings and the Rolling Stone information? I absolutely do. So there you have it, folks, and I'm not going to take up any more of your time, but I do want to make it clear.
You took it all. No, I'm kidding.
I want to make it clear, though. Yeah, I got to tell you.
No, I know.
This is stuff that people die over.
Die over, have died over, and will continue to die over. I mean, really. When we look at the type of information we're dealing with here, people are dealing with in a time where information is looked upon as terroristic activity.
I think the head of the CIA and the CIA has probably can outgun. I'd be cannon fodder. Okay, most people would be taking on the head of the CIA or the CIA. Most people would be cannon fodder.
Yeah, here we have Snowden. NSA targeted journalists critical of government after 9/11. Now, this article from The Hill says leaker Edward Snowden accused the NSA of targeting reporters who wrote critically about the government after the 9/11 attacks and warned it was unforgivably reckless for journalists to use unencrypted email messages when discussing sensitive matters. Snowden said in an interview with the New York Times Magazine publicist Tuesday that he came to trust Laura Poitras, the documentary filmmaker who, along with The Guardian reporter Glenn Greenwald, helped report his disclosure of secret surveillance programs because she herself had been targeted by the NSA. Laura and reporter Glenn are among the few who had reported fearlessly on controversial topics through this period, even in the face of withering personal criticism, and resulting in Laura specifically becoming targeted by the very programs involved in the recent disclosures, Snowden said for the article, A Profile of Portraits. Snowden didn't detail how Portraits was targeted by the NSA surveillance program he disclosed, but suggested the agency was tracking her emails and that cautioned other journalists that they could too be under surveillance. Once again, this Edward Snowden information is nothing new, nothing earth-shattering, and nothing out of the ordinary, and it just puzzles me to see that we know they're coming after journalists. We know they're coming after bloggers, whether they are paid by salary or unpaid, as Miss Feinstein would say. But with that, we do have our caller coming in. He is on hold. We're going to bring him on right now. And we have about 9 minutes before the break. Yoda. Glad to have you on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, even though it's only for a short time. What's on your mind tonight, sir?
Good evening, gentlemen, and good evening, audience. I won't take much time at all. I would like to address my comments through the chat room to the worldwide audience. It would be really nice if the chat room could acknowledge what I'm saying. My friends there will tell me that the other worldwide audience is listening. This revelation will have good Doug and Joe blushing, so they might want to cover their ears now. Doug and Joe have clearly reached celebrity status. Their wonderful program grows and grows almost daily. And that's a good thing, so we should congratulate them in the chat room and out of the chat room for their accomplishment under horrendous difficulties. With celebrity status comes a risk. My group, the magnifiedview.com, or sections of my group, have been in the counter-terrorist business long before it was fashionable. We recently did a risk assessment, a threat assessment, about Doug and Joe and the program. Least I forget their powerhouse producer, Mitch, and found, like other celebrities, news or stars or baseball people or politicians, they're really under threat from several areas. One of them is what we identify in law enforcement as the 5150, means mentally ill. The mentally ill will take exception and umbrage to almost anything, so there's certainly a risk to Doug and Joe and Mitch Santel personally and to the program. The next category we've calculated and assessed of risk is from the criminals, the criminal element, the hardened guys that typically want to extort the program for money, making up bad stuff, and extorting Doug and Joe personally. Finally, they're at high government risk. As we've seen from the administration, the government doesn't hesitate in targeting journalists they don't like, in targeting the Tea Party and other elements. Finally, in the fourth category of risk that we assess is lazy people in the government that will lock onto anything and make a career out of it. Can be devastating to the victim they're picking on in terms of hiring lawyers and like that. Chat room, tell me if I'm getting through with this, please, and if this is making sense about Doug and Joe and Mitch's celebrity status. Does this, and we need to congratulate them for that. Help me with that, if you will. They've invited, Lord knows, they've invited me back to the program. I was initially on in June. I'll be on the second hour this Friday night. As most of the new friends I've met know, we're a counter-terrorist group, and I'll be talking Friday night about the current closure of embassies, as Doug did tonight, and how this will impact each and every one of us, believe it or not, in the United States. Anyway, moving forward, our professional assessment, we've been in counterterrorism since Julius Caesar was a corporal. We do threat assessments for celebrities, for different government agencies, often before they're assigned overseas or they expatriate overseas. Doug and Joe up pretty high in the threat profile. A section of our group also reacts to threats without notice. When a bona fide threat comes in, we respond to that. We hit the ground with it and neutralize the threat. So moving on, I promise to be mercifully brief. Doug and Joe's show is growing by the hour, and they need new equipment. It's hard to describe, even I'm not a tech. I know about guns and parachutes and stuff you swim underwater with. I certainly don't know about radio. They need to continue growth and to serve you now, growing audience. They need a lot of equipment, radio equipment and whatever that language is, enhanced, trick new telephone stuff and computers. So they really need donations to go forward. The show is donation-based. You'll notice out of their goodness, they don't monetize the show and bore you to death with a whole bunch of advertisements. So we can't have it always. Incidentally, we charge a pretty penny for threat assessments to government and corporations. And magnifieddview.com made our little contribution and donation for the assessment to these guys free of charge. We did it on a complimentary basis. So I hope we can stir up donations so they can continue to get new equipment to serve all of us. I learn a lot from the program and pass that on to our audience. We're coming up with a new article Friday on inside the current terrorist threats and warnings throughout. So I will now turn it back to blushing Doug and Joe, but two things. They are celebrities and they're under threat. We're working closely with them on to protect them and react if it becomes a reality, and they could sure use some reinvigorated donations. I'll touch that again Friday night, and I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank Doug and Joe for letting me hijack the program. Blushing or not, I want to know from the chat room, if you will, am I getting through with this? Is this making sense, chat? I'll pause a minute, and boy, this thing moves fast. I'll pause.
Yeah,
and
you
take
do. Yoda, you do have the chat room's endorsement, and I don't know how you knew we were blushing, but we talked before the show, and you said you wanted to call in, and we were not aware what you wanted to talk about. I do want to thank you for your assessment.
Very much so.
It is something that, you know, there's a lot in there that I've never even considered, although I wouldn't consider myself a celebrity status. I think I can speak for my dad on that one too, but you know, your blog, Magnified View, your website here, we'll post in the chat room. You guys check that out, magnifieddview.com. It has great analysis on there. And yeah, Yoda, you'll be on second hour on Friday night with my dad.
Looking forward to it, Yoda.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, chat room, and thank you, audience, wherever you are. Have a good night.
God bless you, sir. God bless you. I got to tell you, folks, Yoda is one of the most patriotic and one of the most knowledgeable individuals I've ever had the pleasure to speak with. MagnifiedView.com. I check it every day. I've got it on my bookmarks. MagnifiedView.com. Yoda was, of course, that's a pseudonym, the nickname, if you will. If you want to know about Yoda, click the About section. Yoda was, he was part of a team. He was in Beirut when the bullets were flying back in 1981. Yoda is a pen name of the founding member of the Magnified View. He does work closely with U.S. and allied intelligence, military, law enforcement agencies, and consulting counterterrorist subjects. His identity is undisclosed because for his safety. Again, this is a gentleman that was at ground zero in Beirut when you certainly did not want to be in Beirut for summer vacation. It took taking on bullets, bombs, and bluster. He's a true hero in my book, and he does have he's an active hostage negotiator, and he's got one heck of a crisis management team. And yes, they did a crisis or a threat assessment for us that was spot on. And I've got to tell you, folks, blushing we are, but under threat we are as well. And I'm not going to get into anything further on that. With that, Joe, we're going to close the first hour out, and I want to thank Yoda for coming on. You're going to be indisposed on Friday.
Yeah,
and
I won't be here Friday.
I'll be doing the program solo on Friday, and Yoda will be joining us during the second hour on Friday. Folks, he's going to be talking about the embassy closings and how it's going to affect us here. It's going to be a great show. You've got to tune in. Tell your friends. Tell your family. Tell a mundo, like I say. Just join us on Friday. Don't miss it. But for now, coming up is one of my favorite people in the world, Stan Deo, to talk about what's going on. Stan Deo. By the way, folks, if you go to HomelandSecurityUS.com, you can read about a true story that happened to me last week. To me, it's a true story. You might not believe it, but it did happen. I waited till today to write it because I just thought it was so funny how it played out. And it's about Stan and Holly Deo and about just how you never know who you're going to meet. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this, the 13th day of August 2013. I'm Doug Hagmann. In studio with me is my son, Joe Hagmann. Together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Stay with us for...
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 of this Tuesday, August 13th edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Joe Hagmann here along with my co-host, Doug Hagmann, and today is Tuesday. And for our second hour, as every Tuesday from here on out, we have with us our very special guest, Mr. Stan Deo. Go to standeo.com. You can find so much information on his website, from the latest earthquakes and earth events to his daily quake forecast map, to links to all of his books and his wife's books and other information that is a must-read, must-have in these times when learning about preparedness and survival and even Bible prophecy. With that, Mr. Stan Deo, it's glad to have you back on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Loud and clear.
Good. That's good.
And
I often fiddle with the controls, and sometimes I misset them. But anyway, it looks good. Okay, sorry. Now, what do you want to tell me?
No, I just wanted to tell you sent me a picture here, the Planet X rumors. Is this on your website anywhere that I can direct you to?
Not yet. It will be later tonight or early tomorrow. I'm putting a discussion there about that. It's going to be an important thing. I've been doing a lot of checking on the Planet X type stuff, the orbit and timings and other things that might make it possible. But certainly tonight we'll talk about that image and that I've sent you there, and about that Patty person.
Yeah.
And I say person because I'm not exactly sure whether it's a man or a woman.
Well, on here in this picture it says, is the threat stated by Patty Brassard credible? She recently stated the passing of the 10th planet with several small moons would cause huge seismic events here in the near future. I know they were on the Pete Santilli show last night. They've been on a few other shows throughout the last week, been making some waves. A lot of people are listening to what she has to say. Some are believing it, some are skeptical of it, and a lot don't know what to make of it.
Hi, Stan. Doug here. Yeah, I must have gotten about 50 emails saying, hey, you got to have this person on. And my response to that was, hey, we're going to have Stan on.
All right.
So that's that.
I've just sent you an article, an email I got about this Patty Brassard. because when you get something this dynamic or exciting, on the internet and threatening, you need to kind of check the credentials of the person giving it. And first I listened to the video interview with her, him, whatever, and I found a number of things that were scientifically incorrect, overstated. For instance, there was one point where Patty said that this incoming thing, whatever it is, would cause huge earthquakes on the Earth soon, and maybe as high as 15, a Richter 15. They don't make Richter 15 on the scale, but even if they did, I mean, the Chicxulub meteor impact that formed the Gulf of Mexico wouldn't reach that high. It's just ridiculous to say an earthquake like that. It would be a life-extincting event. So I knew that was wrong. And then I listened to her discuss other things and stumbled over facts and figures as though she wasn't sure of what they meant. So I'm not thinking that this person is doing this as a credible scientific witness. In the thing I just sent you about this person, well, I think I did. Let me just see here. I guess I haven't yet. Let me put it across to you. Okay. You'll see that Patty, about her personally, this is what some of the things that worry me, is that she writes story books, like short stories, on a website for transgendered people, like sex change people.
Yeah.
And you kind of go, whoa, wait a minute. And supposedly she's supposed to be dying of depleted uranium exposure on the video. And you look at the photos, and no, she's not that ill either. And she's into transgender porn and doom porn. So when she comes out and tells all this kind of stuff, look the other direction and don't get too excited. I'm writing all this on the thing I'm putting on the website because this is just ridiculous. It's stirring up the people. Particularly Christian folks that look at these things, but also others who, look at prophecies of other writers like Nostradamus and, so forth. So I'm trying to put a lid on the hysteria that's out there. I've run the calculations, and her figures are way off, if there's anything moving there at all. And I would be more prone to look at Marshall Masters' books or comments on Planet X, because at least he was a scientific editor for many years for, I think it was CBS or CNN, something like that, one of the two.
Yeah, I'm familiar with him, and I think a lot of people are too. His YouTube videos and his speculation or comments on this Planet X.
And, I looked at the timings he put. He changed his timings. He said, look, it was almost imminent at one point in the last few years, and then he said, this Planet X is going to take a little bit longer. And with this, I do agree, because my calculations I've gone over and over and over the last week show that something has perturbed or compressed the orbits of Neptune and Uranus for the last several decades. Now, what I don't know is if the orbital change has also affected Saturn and Jupiter, as whatever this mystery object is moves in our system or around it. But to give it due, whatever is causing that compression of the orbits is big. And it's a gravitational perturbation, which means that it can be moving into our system and affecting the invisible part of the planet's orbits. They ride the planets in a kind of an invisible wave in the node of it, and each planet has to orbit in a certain orbit where these waves are. This is something else that I will be putting already in the Gemstone second paper about gravity. And because it's hitting these invisible orbits out there with some of its own external orbits, it might be causing repercussions from a great distance. I'm not sure. But if it is correct what Marshall Masters is saying, this thing could be just inside the orbit of Jupiter, and it may take it 14 years to make a traverse around the backside of the sun and come back out and leave the system. Now, when it gets close to the sun, this object, if it is there, and I keep stressing if, it could cause some severe problems in the surface of the sun, coronal mass ejections, perhaps changes in the magnetic field of the sun that are going to be spectacular coronal mass ejections and flares coming Earth-directed, possibly. What worries me is I cannot get any of my astronomers in the Southern Hemisphere who are not government employees to find anything out there where this might be with the orbits that we've all been trying to calculate.
Now, Stan, if I can stop and ask a question here, this Planet X is different from Comet Ison, or are people spinning it off as one and the same?
No, it's different from Comet Ison.
Okay.
That's just a comment. It wouldn't be making the changes we're talking about. Now, it is possible, I suppose, that we have a binary system where we have two suns, and one has gone to like a red dwarf type thing. It's collapsed in, and it's not emitting light in the visible spectra, so that you'd have to have an infrared telescope to see it. And that's not going to be, my amateur astronomers aren't going to be able to afford something like that. That's way expensive. That's a government level expense, or university or something like that. But no one that I've talked to in the Southern Hemisphere with normal telescopes has been able to detect this. We are getting emails and photos from phones and stuff in the United States from people seeing the sun at sunrise and at sunset with a companion right next to it, a bright star that's big enough to be the moon in its, what you see the moon sometimes setting with the sun, that big, like a dime held out at arm's length. Now, these things, I've asked these people, I've religiously done this, I've said, look, okay, if what you're saying is correct, go out and take a picture the same time of day tomorrow, same place, and send it to me if you get the same result. And they're not coming back like that. So I'm thinking whatever they're seeing is a transient atmospheric effect. Why would they be seeing these more now? We've been seeing a lot of metal dust put into the air over the last decade in the form of chemtrails. This may change optical characteristics of our atmosphere, and it may allow the sun itself to generate a ghost image right next to it on certain days and not others. So, as I say, I've not been able to see anything that would do this yet.
Okay, you know what, Stan? I just have boy, I can't even articulate tonight, but I've got a question. Planet X does exist, correct? I mean, there is. It's real.
Well, NASA says there's a 10th planet out there too. They put it out in the same orbital belt that I calculated for that mystery object as well. So it's a 3,600-year orbit.
Oh, okay.
And Dad, you might not know this. In 1983, they did a big newspaper column or a magazine column talking about this mysterious 10th planet being discovered. No, I've seen it on some of the videos that go around. Stan, you're familiar with what I'm talking about, correct?
Yes, sure. I mean, there are varying discussions about that at NASA and other places trying to comment on NASA's comments on it. NASA has discovered there is a fifth gravitational force, they call it, way out past or in the Kuiper Belt. Some of the deep probes that have gone out that far were trying to go backwards for a while from this mystery force. And I can explain that, with my new theory of gravity and how there are waves in it. And I won't bother you with all the details tonight, but otherwise I'd have to wave my hands a lot faster and bigger motion here.
Okay.
But,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I really wanted to pin that down. As strange as that might sound to like people who really follow this stuff, I had no answer. I've heard it mentioned, and we're talking about Nibiru, right? Is this the same thing as Planet X? Nibiru?
It may well be. It sounds like the same kind of thing,
okay.
Destroyer type thing.
Gotcha.
Over in Bible and stuff, yeah.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to clear that up in my own mind. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Go ahead and take us where you will.
All right. Well, look, as I say, I'll write more on this and put it on the website the next 12, 24 hours here. But I'm not all-seeing, all-knowing, and I could be wrong. That thing could be causing damage in the next 2 or 3 years. I don't think it's going to be next month, but I could be wrong. And I'm telling people, look, we've told you, a lot of us here have told you to get prepared for normal emergencies. What might happen with this thing, it might cause weather changes, it might cause earthquakes, it might, a lot of these things between now and whenever it passes close to the sun in the next 6 to 7 years. In fact, the effects would start long before that, in the next year or so. But because the Bible does talk about the sun doing some peculiar things, going black with a black cloud of dust around it, and also because it increases its light output by 7 times in certain wavelengths, particularly the ultraviolet, we know that if we're in the end days, which I think we are, that we're going to be seeing some strange things in the heavens, and even possibly the Earth flipping, the poles, not only the magnetic poles, but the entire planet. I was just reading some scripture on that last week, and okay, these things are all possible. I'm seeing signs of something wrong with the Earth. These sinkholes everywhere. I mean, that one down in Florida, that 60-foot diameter thing, dang, you go to bed one night and you're down, in a hole the next morning.
We had one person in Florida who was swallowed whole while they laid in their bed just a few months back, and I was going to ask you about this one at the Disney resort. It seems like the East Coast is being saturated. We've never really even dried up from springtime around here, and it just keeps raining and raining and raining. Is the rain on the East Coast connected with these sinkholes?
I'm sure it is.
We've talked about this before.
Yeah, I'm sure that the water flows are causing these sinkholes, the majority of them, whether it be a broken pipe or whether it be abnormal amounts of water flowing underground. But you got to ask yourself this. We're having 6 to 7 times more reports of sinkholes around the planet than we've ever had before. We didn't hear about these when we were kids, in the 50s and 60s. The number of sinkholes is huge. Now, they are results usually of fluid flow of some sort. Now, eroding underneath these places. But they've all decided to start releasing in the last year or so. And that, to me, gets back to the point I'm trying to make several times, in that the Earth itself is expanding. It's done it before, and I don't know whether it'll be a sudden jump to the next expansion radius it's going to, or whether it will be a slow process over several months or years. But we know that if it starts to expand, it's going to stretch gas pipes, water pipes, all kinds of underground stuff, electrical things that we've got. And there will be more breaks of these kind of things, which will lead, of course, with the fluid conductors, to more sinkholes, because it will erode areas that were already getting water before, but it'll erode them in a hurry. And because the Earth is expanding, the pressure that holds the dirt together, sideways pressure, will lessen, and things that would be supported for a long time to come suddenly aren't able to be supported, and they drop down into a big sinkhole. And look at these holes. They aren't, the majority of them are not square or like rectangular. They're round, almost perfectly round. And when you expand a balloon with a dot you put on it when it was uninflated, that little circular dot will start to come out in a circle. And even if you put a square dot on it and expand it, it will begin to almost round itself to follow the curve of the expansion, which tells me that these round sinkholes are getting uniform stresses on them as the planet's surface starts to expand. I can't see it any other way. I'll try, those options if someone's got a better idea, but this is what I see.
Stan, if I can ask a question here, and I'm not sure if this is relevant to the sinkholes, but I just began researching by accident Fibonacci, the Fibonacci numbers, the number sequence of Fibonacci, where you're familiar with that, I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And I'm not sure I understand it enough to even formulate a coherent question, except to ask, the Fibonacci number sequence, the spirals created by these circular arcs, that is, does this have anything to do with, for example, the physics of the sinkholes? And I know that probably sounds a ridiculous question to you, but given their shape, given the shape of the sinkholes, any relation between the Fibonacci number sequence and sinkholes?
Wow.
The physics, from a physics point of view.
I had never thought about it. I'm just trying to quickly contemplate what could be connected like that. I don't have an immediate answer. Well, I do know that the Fibonacci series can be used a number of ways, and depending on the variables you set for the curves of the spirals, you can form sea life and double helix for the DNA. There's a number of things that follow that.
It seemed when you mentioned the just now about the shape of the sinkholes and I don't know, maybe it's because I've been researching this, trying to understand really trying to understand what the Fibonacci number sequence is and how it relates to all things living and all things in our physics wise.
I know what you're doing. You're playing lotto with Fibonacci series.
Yeah, and losing miserably. It was just something. Again, it was kind of something that I thought of in my stupor of haze and stupor of sleep deprivation. But I was thinking, well, you're right. I mean, we don't see rectangular sinkholes. We don't see necessarily square sinkholes. There's a shape to them, right? I mean,
they're basically round.
Yeah, exactly. Now, again, maybe I'm reading too much into it. Okay, well, being a curious kind of guy, why are they all round? And I'm not trying to be funny about it. I'm serious. I'm not trying to be funny about that. But is there something that would explain that in the physics world? And also, does torsion physics, which I'm not even sure how to explain that, does that play into this?
Well, if I understand what you're saying about torsion physics, basically we're looking at stresses, balanced and imbalanced, and as I've said before, the surface of the Earth, the gravitational field forces the dirt particles, the rocks and everything, to squeeze against each other sideways as well as toward the center of the planet. And if you start to expand the surface of the Earth, you're going to have a thinner mantle, and you're going to reduce the sideways pressure on the dirt and rocks, so that something that is already prone to failing, like a limestone or limestone sand mixed subsoil, which has got a water leak in it somehow, whether it be from natural causes or broken pipe or whatever, the area that the object is sitting on that gets hit by the sinkhole, that area will fail in a basically circular fashion where the load is on top of it until it reaches the boundaries of where the ground is now dry. And, again, Florida is a perfect example of this. There's so many areas down there that get sinkholes and so much water just near the surface of Florida that these sinkholes are happening more rapidly there than in other places, because the soil, the rock, etc., is already primed to fail, and it doesn't fail until an equal stretching, a torsion on it, pulls it apart, and because it's basically equal, it'll make a round hole.
Okay.
You're looking at Fibonacci series and spirals while you're pondering your navel and stuff, and I was.
How did you know that?
Well, yeah. I was doing that the other day, and I said, why is it that, like, galaxies spiral out with those spiral arms, beautiful ones, and most of them, and some get to be, like spherical shaped, but mainly they're spiral, and some have collected into elliptical things, which are like spiral arms that have closed in closer to the center of the galaxy. And then when I look at star systems with planets and stuff, well, you got stars, and they have planets or orbital rings around them, but they don't have spiral arms around these stars. And then I thought, well, let's look at atoms. And, well, now atoms don't have spiral arms around them. And, in fact, they have loops that form discrete patterns over the spherical center of the atom, which makes more of these little flip loops you get. Then you get an electron shell, and then the next electron shell out from that, and so forth. And I thought, well, why isn't it that they're not all the same? Why aren't they all like spirals or, like orbits around stars like planets? I mean, atoms don't have planets, little tiny miniature planets. They have these looped fields. And I got to realizing it's particles again. If you conceive empty space as a fluid made of, let's call them, ether atoms that are so small that an atom, as we see it, would be like a galaxy compared to the size of those little, ether atoms or whatever to make this fluid. Then I thought, well, okay, it's like on like maybe a pool table where you got billiard balls out there. If you have one billiard ball 2 inches from another one, and you hit the cue ball to hit it, bang, it'll hit it real quick. But if you move the target ball further away and hit the cue ball, it takes longer for the cue ball to get there to hit it. Okay. And further yet, way to the end of the table, much longer, relatively speaking, for that cue ball to hit the target. Now, suppose that the atoms of ether space are like these cue balls, these little miniature cue balls. When you have them very close together and you, at an atom size, our atom size, you spin an atom at 50 million times a second or more in some cases, that is spinning in the fluid of ether space so fast that it sends out shock waves to the particles right around it, and they rapidly hit the next particle, bang, 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 like that. And that makes everything reflect back to the atom that's spinning and form a very compact, tight little thing that's self-insulating. It spins so fast it forms a cavity around itself, and it just doesn't die for a long time. But then if you look at a star system compared to an atom, well now, the star system is kind of not doing 50 million revs a second at all. It's just, so many days per turn of a sun, a normal sun.
Right.
Now, in that case, when the energy of the spin field that creates our sun hits particles right next to it, they're getting kicked out at not so fast because it's not doing 50 million times a second. It's, it's going to go bang, ka-bang, ka-bang, and it'll form waves like in a pond instead of these filament loops that form shells and atoms. And then if you go up to the galaxy, well, that is spinning so slow that it can't even get up enough reflected energy back to form a wave or a pattern, like a wave node, standing wave around it like stars do. Instead, it forms spiral arms because it just cannot get up the speed. And that's how I see everything going from the largest to the smallest, operating in a uniform density space filled with little ether atoms. Isn't that neat for contemplating a navel?
Yes.
I'm just sitting here picturing all that, and it makes a lot of sense.
Well, you create a very, very nice mental picture for those listening without video, of course. Understandable.
I'm getting tired swinging around the room.
That was a great explanation, and a great mental picture anyway. Once again, I'm not sure if I can comprehend the depth of what you're saying. But if I understand it correctly, we're living and moving about in a sea of subatomic particles, if you will. Is that right?
Well, that's the best I can describe it. I mean, I still don't know where the edge of the universe is, or the end of it.
So basically, what we see at an atomic level here, and the reasons and all the laws of nature apply in space, just on, if we're looking at it at a molecular level here on Earth, the same thing applies just in a much bigger arena, and that's the universe.
Yeah, and in that arena you're talking about, it's all dependent. Everything that we see and sense out there is dependent upon spin of some kind. It's what we call the angular velocity, but it's really what we would call in real speak spin. Galaxy spin, stars spin, atom spin.
And that's what I call the beauty of the Lord's creation. I mean, it just put together so well and perfectly that it's impossible for the evolutionists out there. It just can't be duplicated, no matter how hard somebody tried.
I know, but I mean, you can even make an argument for God being right-handed when He started the universe. I mean, it's
wow.
I love that.
A couple of beers, but
all right, we do have a listener question.
I got a couple here too. So
okay.
you
all right, first one here.
You first. Go ahead.
They wanted to know about Edward, if you're familiar with the statements Edward Snowden made about the kill shot. They claim the government was prepping for an intense and dangerous sun activity in September. Stan, what do you think about the sun, and if anything is likely to have some kind of big impact in the near future?
Well, guys, that's hard to answer because of the limited access I have to, astronomical data that the government could get. I do know, though, that there are a number of states that are doing emergency drills and military drills, like in Wisconsin. They had a small town there where the U.S. Army was conducting military occupation drills. And in Indiana, there was a town where they had thousands out that were training for a major disaster there, and that's just in the last couple of weeks. And there have been others. And you've heard, I'm sure, in the past about all the drills and stuff they did down the New Madrid area. And these things are in the United States primarily, and I don't know what China or the others are doing for emergency preparation. I do know that China has, for other reasons at least, made tunnels and underground bunkers all over the country, especially in the high-density population areas, to help their people survive a nuclear attack or some other type of impact on the planet. Now, that meteor that came down into Russia a couple months back, that meteor may have been traveling with other things because, as NASA so learnedly pointed out, it was not part of the passing object that was an Earth grazer that didn't quite come into the atmosphere, and it was a different impact vector from that, and that's from another thing that's maybe has companions headed our way. Again, either they're lying to us about how good their detection systems are for things like that when they say, "Oh, we just got missed by one. Oh, just missed us. Well, that was close," or they're purposely, or they don't have the technology to get these things and they're crossing their fingers. But I tend to think that we have enough deep space probes and other methods of detecting meteors and asteroids that certainly a great majority of them have been clocked and have been calibrated into an ephemeral, like an equation for the ephemeris to tell when they're going to come near or if they are. There are still a lot of untracked things. They know from the mass of and the gravity that these things act upon on other objects. They can tell that we've got things out there. They just can't track them. So September, October, it could be. I see little signs. I don't know that I've ever seen so much government involvement in training and food purchases and all that kind of stuff, unless they're expecting huge amount of civil disobedience or huge disasters. And they had bullets too, which doesn't sound like anything except crowd control or crowd elimination. I often wonder if the things that are being set up for us in the United States, either to be a dictatorship or to kill a bunch of us one way or the other by food, by metal poisoning, from chemtrails, whatever, if Satan isn't getting rid of America and reducing its population because of the Judeo-Christian ethic and witness that comes out of this country. I mean, this is the world center, has been anyway. And, reducing the American population to zero would only make, like a gnat's exhaust in the population of the world. We're really not that big of a consumer as far as numbers of people. So, the only reason I can see that these things are happening, if they're being planned this way, is for Satan to get rid of those who object. And, of course, they're filled with the Spirit. I guess he figures if he kills them, then the Spirit goes away. I don't know. But we are being persecuted, for what we've done in the past as far as Christian outreach and witness. And sadly, that outreach has dwindled. But I do hope, from what I'm hearing out there, that a revival, a last-minute, huge revival in Christianity is going to happen in the States before, things get really, really, really terrible. I hope that's true.
Yeah, we do as well, and that's pretty sobering, Stan, to hear you say that. we know that the our Judeo-Christian heritage is they're targeting us, and there's a war against Judeo-Christianity here in this country, an active war, and it's a lot of people don't really see it, and it's unfortunate because there's a lot of people aren't really recognizing what's taking place. I mean, look at the military. Look at what they're doing with the military, and about how they're eradicating any reference to Jesus, any reference to the Scripture, essentially.
Right.
So
right.
You're exactly right on that. Wow, sobering, but true. We've got a question here from Karen, who's listening in Rome, Italy, where it's an early 3:40 in the morning. She writes this: I'm writing with anticipation for tonight's show, in particular for Mr. Deo. Would you ask him what he thinks about the Hawaiian Islands being under a lot of risk for dangerous volcanic or earthquake activity?
It's funny she should ask about that, because Holly's got an article up there about a 4.8 quake beneath Kilauea volcano today or the day before. It's on our website there. You can see it in the news. The Hawaiian Islands are quite vulnerable to plate tectonic movements on the sides of the Pacific. If you'll look on a map, especially one that's got bathymetry or the mountains under the sea, the elevation under the sea, you'll see that Hawaii is part of a long string of islands that have formed and then gone away as the surface of the Earth expanded. You can see the little islands that are buried, these volcanic vents. And science tells us that this is because there's a hot spot in the mantle underneath Hawaii, and that hot spot sends up plumes of magma, making volcanic ash and islands. As the Earth's mantle goes over that spot, it leaves a trail of little islands that have been formed by these volcanic vents, the vent as it passes over the vent. Don't need to get into the era and the common concept of that. The direction which they say the islands were formed as the mantle is stretched is exactly opposite to what they tell you. But anyway, yes, the Hawaiian Islands are at risk, and in fact, in the today's, I'm just getting my earthquake forecast map up for today. Just give me a second here. In today's forecast map, I see that we have an increase of potential volcanic and or earthquake activity from Indonesia all the way around the Pacific up through the Aleutians, down the west coast of the United States, down through Central America, and all the way down to Peru, and the top of Chile even. This indicates to me, from what I've been seeing, that the Pacific arc of fire is active with all this plate tectonic stretching I'm thinking we're seeing. And in fact, today, just north of Australia, there's a little red circle in Indonesia, and that turned out to be a volcano on an island there, an Indonesian island. It's got a funny name here. It's called East Nusa Tenggara, and it's Mount Rokatenda. Anyway, it erupted today, and it began in August the 10th, I think. But, as I say, I've been seeing these things forming in Indonesia for several weeks, and they intensify and then they disappear. New Guinea is also at risk, and northern Indonesia, or up north a ways from where I was just talking about, they've been under risk for some time. And the North Indian Ocean, it's got problems. So, not only Hawaii, but other places. And I know she's probably asking because she's going back to Hawaii or has relatives or friends there. But sadly, with Hawaii, it's one of the areas on the global map that I cannot accurately forecast quakes, because the signals that the temperatures and voltages that I read to make the predictions, I can't get anything out of Hawaii unless it's huge. And it's very rare occasion you'll ever see me put a circle around that. So my advice, for a number of reasons, would not be to live there. I would move to inland somewhere at an altitude of about a mile in some country, so that you have a chance when the Earth's crust starts to reform, and as the Bible says, the mountains become low and the low become high, that you're in a mid-range zone, that you might end up being at sea level or somewhere around there, hopefully on the dry side.
Wow.
I hope that's answered your question properly.
Karen, it answers my question. I mean, a tropical paradise with a potential for destruction, apparently.
Well, look, even if it's not volcanoes and earthquakes wiping it out, it's overpopulated. If any major catastrophe like war or otherwise, impacts the food chain that gets to the islands, and other supplies of chemistry to grow food, it's going to erupt into civil war, where the Hawaiians try to get, the natives try to get rid of the Europeans that are on the island. They've already been making noises like that now. And if you don't have the ships coming in there, if the ships aren't there, it's not a clever place to be, because it's going to be a war zone.
It's a good point, and a very simple point at that. Wow.
Yeah, we saw the earthquake today in Chile, or in Panama, 6.7. I keep going back to those stats you have in the book Cosmic Conspiracy, where from 1897 to 1947 there was an average of 3.3 6.0 earthquakes in a decade. And I've been saying, we've been seeing 3 6.0 earthquakes in a day sometimes. And I have a list here. I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you, but just in August here, from August 2nd to August 8th, we've had thousands of fish in Alaska dying, thousands in Finland, in Canada, in Toronto, hundreds of fish, 100,000 in the Arkansas River, thousands in China, thousands in Pakistan, tons in the UK. We have rivers drying up. We have floods going on across all parts of the globe, whether it's in the central U.S. to India to China. We are seeing these, in hurricane season for the Atlantic, seems to be non-existent. But what's going on in the Pacific with the hurricanes? I know I kind of jumped from the animal death.
The animals. Let's stick with the animals first, because Holly's been noticing this and putting up articles about large numbers of dolphins dying and beaching themselves on the East Coast and the West Coast. Now, coupled with all that stuff you're talking about with the fish die-offs, if you read the scientists' explanation for what they think has killed these dolphins and various other fish and some birds that have been falling out of the sky in Canada, they are saying that, I think it's a virus that's got them. Okay, then that virus is in Indonesia, the United States, all over the planet, and it's getting all kinds of fish and birds suddenly. Now, it might be that a virus or some kind of bacteria is affecting them now, whereas 2 years ago it wouldn't have. And my thought on this, how this could work and still have the report be true, but get to the root cause, and that is that their immune systems have been compromised either chemically or by the increased ultraviolet light coming from the sun. The French did studies on this back in the 70s, where they showed that immune systems were compromised in certain fields of ultraviolet. If you were exposed to it for a period of time, your immune system failed and made you more susceptible to things your body would fight off, normally, a cold or this or that. Now, that might be happening on a global scale, because the ultraviolet is hitting all of these animals and the food chain that they live on, whether it be plant or animal or microbe, and it is affecting the whole food chain. And I know that the ultraviolet, since 1992, we've had those 2 new spectra come down. Those have been allowing phytoplankton to multiply and go forth in the oceans in great numbers, and they've profited from that in that they could absorb this and use it to grow. But living forms react differently to various types of ultraviolet, and the higher the frequency gets in the ultraviolet, the greater risk we have. And on the planet here, they have weather warnings and ultraviolet, where you've got near ultraviolet, area A, area B is next, and area C is next. Well, we hardly ever see sunlight coming in and in great numbers in area C in the ultraviolet, which is up near the 200 nanometer range. But yet in Northern California, they've been finding out that area C thickness, or density from the sun, is killing off huge pine trees. And so is this affecting then fish, birds? Is it the magnetic field change that we've seen numbers of these things happening, that bottlenose and whales and stuff navigate on the shore and think, I should be here, why isn't there water here? There's just so many things that are happening that it's something that's not right. Now, what was the second part of your question, Joe?
The hurricane season, the existence of a non-hurricane season in the Atlantic, while we were seeing increased activity coming off the Pacific.
Yes, that is strange. There is something happening in the Atlantic, all through the North Atlantic primarily, and I think it has to do with a bulge forming there in the mantle. Reports out of Spain were talking about here in the last month about a new tectonic plate border forming off the northwest coast of Africa. That's not good, because that means there's a break about to occur there, and that can only be from forces inside the Earth pushing up on the seabed. Now, is that affecting the hurricane production there, or is it the things over in the Pacific that are absorbing the heat and therefore making the heat engine that drives the hurricanes? There have been so many widespread changes of weather. I mean, we've been sitting one here in Colorado for this year, but where seasons are accelerated or diminished depending on where you are. Now, this has got to be due to changes in the global climate and, dare I say, the heating of the planet, not global warming, but the heating, due to a number of factors from the sun primarily. And this is creating extremes of flood, extremes of heat and drought. And these things drive hurricanes. So why is it in the Pacific rather than in the Atlantic? Because the prevailing ocean currents, the prevailing jet stream, a number of these things have been affected by the change in our global climate. I think due to a number of factors, again, related to the sun and to our magnetic field, and to possibly the beginning of a magnetic pole shift right now, as we speak, in the Earth's core. All these things could be driving the weather to different locations.
But that doesn't mean, Stan, that we should relax with respect to the hurricane season in the Atlantic, though, right?
No, I would prepare because, if anything, what we're seeing here is surprise climatology. I mean, it's just, okay, it's been this way for 5,000 years. It'll be this way tomorrow, but it may not be.
Wow. Okay. Now, you mentioned something, too. We've had some guests on this week talking about now, one of the things they talked about was the aerial spraying, the chemtrails in the Pacific Northwest, and you referenced the tree bark, or the pine trees, the bark of the trees coming off. Is that ultraviolet? Is that related solely to the ultraviolet coming through, or?
Well, from the report I read, they're putting the majority of the blame there. I mean, they've never seen anything like that. But, I mean, look, if the Bible prophecies are correct about this time, and we're going to see the light of the sun go up 7 times, if it were just purely the infrared spectrum, which is way down in the visible light, down toward the 700 nanometer type range, the stuff you see out there when you're at the beach in the old days, if it were 7 times in that wavelength of light, it would not only fry the surface of the planet, it would probably make new oil in the surface of the planet with what it cooks in the oceans and everywhere. It would boil the oceans. I mean, not just a gentle boil, it would just be a bubbling boil. Roads would melt, buildings would fall and collapse because the steel melted. I mean, this kind of huge heat increase. But that's not what's going to happen. The sun's light will increase, but the heat that it gives to the planet will not. And ultraviolet will get through it. Ultraviolet can get through the cloud structure. But when you get increased heat of the kind we're talking about in biblical proportions, it will certainly cause water streams to dry up, the oceans to release a lot more moisture into the atmosphere, and we will have a cloud shield that will reflect away a lot of the damaging light coming from the sun. It'll be a short transition period, a few days, until there's enough steam in the air to do that. So it's a dangerous time, but yet not an impossible time because of the shielding that the system will generate to help us. So we will live through this, and I do think this day is coming within the next 7 to 10 years, if not sooner.
Wow. Okay. And I like how you essentially connected the dots, between the biblical prophecy and the science behind it, how this would work and is working, and we're seeing it play out. Now, Stan, we've got about 5 minutes left for this segment. What's closing thoughts? What's on your radar? What's of concern to you? If this were our last broadcast together, and who knows, we might be off air tomorrow. What would you say to our listeners tonight about what's taking place, or about anything that's on your mind in terms of current events?
Well,
you have the floor.
Doug, there are a number of things, but when you boil it right down, the important thing is that your listeners have a choice. If they're not believers already, followers of Jesus, they have a choice to select where they will go when they die, and that's by being saved, asking Jesus to forgive their sins and to indwell their body with the Holy Spirit, so that they are taken, whether they die or whether it's a rapture, they are taken to be with the Lord in a much better, a real world than what's here. That's the important thing, because we're all going to die. It's just a matter of when and how. And with things getting more tense like they are in the world, more crisis curves, the pressure on my mind is to tell people, look, make that your first effort. In fact, in the Cosmic Conspiracy, I put it in every edition of it, page 127. Sign here and dedicate. Join the team with Jesus, and whatever happens, you'll be taken care of, even if it means dying. But you will be living thereafter in a much better place. I reflect back on the Avatar movie the other day. I was talking to Holly. If you look at it in kind of this way, it was a virtual reality where we had real humans that came to a world that was like a living world of beings that were bigger and more peaceful, and they didn't have high tech. And one of the soldiers, or several, were put into this coffin-like thing, and they were able to occupy a grown husk that looked like the indigenous people on this planet, and it was like they entered into a virtual reality on that planet. And this is how it is with us here on Earth. We are in a virtual reality, and our spirit is elsewhere, in a parallel world, but it is operating this mechanism, our body. And if you want to continue after this, then you need to choose a side your own. That's the important thing, because the world around us is not the forever reality. This is just a temporary thing. And that's the pressure on my heart, is to tell people, if you've been thinking about making a decision or looking into it, now is the time. And second to that, in the meantime, regardless of whether you're Christian or Jewish or whatever, prepare to take care of your family and yourself as best you can when civilization breaks down and some of these great threatening potential disasters. Don't be afraid. Just get busy, and every day make a little preparation, a little bit every day. And if you haven't even prepared yet at all, one day's preparation is better than none. One day's worth of water, then 2, then 3. And these are the 2 things that Holly and I think are the most important things. And if you get her Dare to Prepare book, that tells you how to physically prepare. If you get the Cosmic Conspiracy book, that tells you how to spiritually prepare and to also avoid a great alien deception that is coming on this planet in the near future. Those are the important issues.
Stan, I thank you so much for saying that, because I just couldn't say it any better than you just said that, Stan. God bless you for that.
I want to let you know our audience appreciates you, Mr. Standale. They are singing your praises in the chat room, thanking you for being here and being a part of our broadcast. And we want to thank you for being a part of our broadcast. And we like this every week thing. It is, with the rate things are changing, the way things are going, the message needs to get out to people that things can change in the blink of an eye, whether it's a universal change or a personal change. You could get thrown down a sinkhole before you even wake up in the morning, or You know, you just don't know, and it's a blessing to have you and your wife working with us and helping people to understand what they do need to do before these perilous times do come.
Well, and you guys are a blessing as well, because you're doing it every day. I mean, that would drive me crazy trying to do it every day.
Well, it's a short drive for us, Stan. let me tell you. But we so appreciate your time, your gift of time to us, and I know it interrupts your schedule, but our listeners are just they love you, we love you, and you and your wife, and we thank you so much for being a part of our program.
Thank you for the invite, guys.
All right, God bless you, my friend.
Night night.
All right, good night.
That was Stan Dale on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. We're going to break now into the second hour on this August 13th, 2013. When we come back, your phone calls and some more news. Your phone calls at 661-244-9839. That is 661-244-9839.
And if I can just add this right before the break here, folks, I've got a pretty vast library, and two books that I have on my desk or my file cabinet all the time: Cosmic Conspiracy and Dare to Prepare. I use Dare to Prepare as a reference manual all of the time. You would be surprised how much you can learn, the basic information. Dare to Prepare. Well, folks, even before anything else, please add that to your library. I don't know how else to say that, how important to me that is. And in addition to that, Holly Dale has put so much time and so much effort into providing you other free information at the website standale.com, daretoprepare.com. standale.com, daretoprepare.com. It's hard linked off of our website at homelandsecurityus.com. But please, ladies and gentlemen, while you still can, get the book Dare to Prepare, and get Stan's book Cosmic Conspiracy. Joe, you know what? I don't think we've ever had a book that is so full of information, diverse information, but it's all tied together. And I just think if you do nothing else, those two books are critical for your library, for your knowledge, and really for your preparation, salvation, and safety. I really believe that. And we don't get anything for saying this. We're not trying to sell books here. We're trying to save people, help save people. I just wanted to say that before the break. Go ahead, Jim.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our third and final hour on this Tuesday edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Hour number one, if you missed it, we were alone going over some news stories of the day. And hour number two, we were joined by our very special guest every Tuesday night that we were joined by Mr. Stan Dale. Hour number one, we talked a lot about Michael Hastings and a few other important stories. We're going to hit a couple of news stories, and we're going to move on to phone calls. Another key Obamacare provision delayed until 2015. Hidden in a maze of legal jargon is another key provision of Obamacare. The administration has delayed a consumer protection law that sets limits on the cost of health care, giving some insurers the option to raise prices until 2015. The consumer protection law was created to limit out-of-pocket health care costs, such as copays, deductibles, $6,350 for each individual and $12,700 for a family. But under the long, unnoted provision, these limits will be delayed for 1 year. Now, I have a clip here I want to play. It's 3 minutes. It's from Fox News. Host Bill Hemmer goes off on Congress for an Obamacare exemption, calling it absolutely ridiculous.
There is new outrage over subsidies for members of Congress and their staff members on Obamacare. Some Republicans accusing Democrats of pushing the president to change the rules again and saying the only way to solve the problem fairly is to repeal Obamacare entirely. Texas Congressman Steve Stockman is on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And, sir, good morning to you. Thanks for coming in. You're in Las Vegas today. So I guess if you don't like the rules, if you don't like the law, you just amend it and change it. Is that the way it works in Washington?
Well, apparently the president changes it even without Congress, which is illegal. As you know, this morning I think he exempted or allowed the insurance companies to write themselves a bigger check. So what our office is wanting to do is to, as committee staff gets exempted, we'd like to see everybody in the United States become a committee staffer. therefore everybody would be an exempt individual.
Well,
now
that's a good question, because what the exemption means is that there will be subsidies for members of Congress and some of their staffers as they go on to these exchanges as government employees. Question to you and the people working for you, will you take the subsidies as a member of Congress?
Well, they had subsidies prior, but what they did is they wrote out the health care law was writing out 70% of the bill that taxpayers were paying for all federal employees, and we don't intend to take those subsidies. What we want to do is actually grant everybody a waiver by making them all honorary members of the subcommittees or committees. So this bill, as I was mentioning, is written by Nancy Pelosi staffers. They exempted themselves, all the staffers on the committees. And this is something that should be an outrage. You know, it'd be like going to a restaurant saying, this is a fine dining restaurant, but the chef doesn't want to eat the food he prepared for you. This is just an outrage, and I think that Congress should reject it. But here's what we want to know. Listen, but Congress has taken the deal so far as we can tell right now, but how many members of Congress are going to take the subsidies? I mean, it's an unbelievable thing that you can pass a law and change the rules and take taxpayer dollars to fund your health care. And to get subsidies that are not granted to everyday Americans. It's ridiculous. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And this was when the president came down to speak to the House Democrats. Apparently the deal was cut then. I don't even know if the Speaker's aware of it. We've inquired about it and how this is happening. But this is unilaterally coming from the White House at the request of the House Democrats. We still don't know the parameters of it. We still don't understand.
All right, there you have it. As we reported to you last week, exemptions for congressmen, staffers of congressmen, just like the exemptions given to companies like McDonald's and Walmart and the 2,000-plus corporations that got Obamacare exemptions because of the cost. One more piece of news, and I'm going to turn it over to my father, John Kerry. This little thing called the Internet makes it much harder to govern. Speaking to State Department personnel at the U.S. Embassy in Brasilia, Brazil, on Tuesday, Secretary of State John Kerry said that this little thing called the Internet makes it much harder to govern. He also said that ever since the end of the Cold War, forces have been unleashed that are tampered down for centuries by dictators. I'm a student of history, and I love to go back and read particularly great book like Henry Kissinger's book about diplomacy, where you think about the 18th and 19th centuries and the balance of power and how difficult it was for countries to advance their interests in years and years of wars. Kerry said to a gathering of the State Department employees and their families. And we sometimes say to ourselves, boy, aren't we lucky? Well, folks, he said, ever since the end of the Cold War, forces have been unleashed that were tampered down for centuries by dictators. And that was complicated further by this little thing called the Internet and the ability of people everywhere to communicate instantaneously and have more and more information coming at them in one day than most people can process in a month or a year. It makes it much, much harder to govern, makes it much harder to organize people, much harder to find common interests, Kerry said, and that's complicated by a rise of sectarianism and religious extremism that is prepared to employ violent means to impose on other people a way of thinking and a way of living that is completely contrary to everything the United States of America has ever stood for. So we need to keep in mind what our goals are and how complicated this world is that we are operating in. End of quote from Mr. John Kerry. So, in his view, Kerry said that this complicated rise in religious extremism that is prepared to employ violent means to impose on other people a way of thinking and a way of living that is contradictory to everything the United States of America stood for. I wish he was more specific about those religious extremisms or extreme and what he means. But we do have another story you're covering. There's news on the BRICS nations, but I want you to hit an article you have first.
Yeah, Joe. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm very concerned about this, and we're going to be addressing this, I think, with V on Thursday, the guerrilla economist. We're going to attempt to be as specific with him as possible. But John Embry, now he is the chief investment strategist of Sprott Asset Management. Have you noticed gold and silver suddenly taking a turn here of late? Just really quickly rising. And if you recall what my DHS source said back in the winter months that when you see the metals take a hit, then things will start happening very quickly. Well, I think that we've seen that. Now we're seeing the beginnings of what the result will be. What I'm trying to say here is gold and silver surging strongly on continued short covering. Now, John Embry from Sprott Asset Management has weighed in here, and he said this, and this is compliments of King World News, but he says that he has thought for a long time that the problems would ignite in the latter part of the year, but he is saying now the economic fuse for financial Armageddon or financial Holocaust, a historic financial Holocaust, has been lit. There is a lot of power on the other side as they have thrown everything but the kitchen sink at gold and silver markets. But he believes that the other side, trying to keep gold and silver down, well, they're now running short on ammunition. And he's describing what has happened here as catastrophic for the central planners. And if you think about this, the central planners, the central bankers, the people behind the powers behind everything want to keep the metals down. And it's a transfer of wealth situation. But Mr. John Embry postulates that right now it looks like the central planners are capitulating. They gambled and went all in an attempt to break the spirit of gold and silver investors around the world. And we heard about this. In fact, you could read email or you could read postings on blogs about, oh my goodness, gold and silver, the prices are down, and what a bad investment I made. I bought at 40 and now it's at 19, and all you gold and silver prostitutes out there, shame on you. Well, it looks like he says this about, remember Bernanke's statement about tapering the QE, tapering the money flow? Well, he says it's preposterous.
And I want to jump in here. Ron Paul asked the Federal Reserve member a question during a hearing, and the Federal Reserve employee responded. Ron Paul asked, how much gold does the Federal Reserve own? And they said 0.
Wow.
That was a year or so ago,
okay,
at least, when he was in office.
Well, I believe that there is little, if any, gold left in Fort Knox. If you go back to 1974, the granddaughter of Colonel Edward Mandell House saying that all this gold was transferred to the Rockefellers. It made the papers, as a matter of fact, and 2 days later, she jumps out of a 10-story window, allegedly jumps, in New York City to her death. Well, think about that. Again, this is 1974, and don't forget, 3 years after Nixon had taken us off of the completely off of the gold standard on August 15th, 1971. But having said that, Mr. Embry says this: we also have this shortage of physical gold, which is reflected by the fact that the gold lease rates have been negative for 25 consecutive days. We then had this revelation that the Bank of England had dumped a staggering 1,300 tons of physical gold into the market that they were supposed to be safely storing for other countries. The Bank of England wouldn't even comment. They just pleaded the fifth. But now, all of this shows how truly desperate this situation has become for Western central planners and just how badly their gamble to break the gold market has failed. All of this is shaping up for an explosion higher in the price of gold. We've already been hearing about discussions of a significant revaluation of gold, thousands of dollars higher than where it is currently trading, and this is coming from respectable people. Think of the Standeos in terms of physics. These are the Standeos of economics. When asked about silver now this is what I found really interesting. Because, ladies and gentlemen, if and I would urge everyone to do this. I talked about this before, but with the influx of new listeners, you might say, look, I can't afford to go out and buy gold or silver. But here's what you can afford to do. If you've got $20 in your pocket, go to the bank and buy a roll of quarters or roll of quarters or half dollars or whatever. And you find the pre-1964 coins. It doesn't cost you anything. And again, those are 90% silver. So you can make a family hobby out of it. You can a family night. Let's go treasure hunting. You can do this. But getting back to what Embry said, and this again is John Embry, no slouch in the economic world. He says, to this day, I'm absolutely baffled as to where the physical silver has come from to meet the massive demand. And folks, there's a massive demand for silver. The latest sizable increase in demand has come from India. And where did V talk about this before? India. That's correct. When you superimpose that on what is still very firm industrial and investment demand for silver elsewhere, it's remarkable that the powers that were able to drive the price as low as they did. So when the price of silver turns, now this according to John Embry, which we are already seeing, and it's gone up to now, I think the spot's $22 or $21 and change. It's going to turn with a vengeance. He adds, no matter how bullish I am on gold, I am way more bullish on silver. Now, he gets into as well what the Russians are doing, how they are buying and storing silver, and what other countries are doing. But the key sentence here, I think this is key to really understand. We will now see historic and catastrophic wealth destruction. It's going to be something to behold, and investors who want to survive this financial holocaust had better be properly positioned. Well, what does that mean? If you've got money in bank deposits, bonds, and financial stocks and such, you're going to see your purchasing power virtually destroyed. But those who are invested in hard assets such as gold and silver and things like that, you're going to be the beneficiaries of this historic wealth transfer. Now you might think, well, wait a minute, I'm not, I'm just trying to survive, not make money. Well, this is what it's about. It's about preserving what you've worked for, earned, and worked all your life for. If you've got money, or if you've got assets, or if you've worked all your life, how are you going to protect that? And I'm not trying to be a financial advisor here at all, or what, I'm just trying to be practical here. What's the best way to protect the wealth that you've earned and made over the course of your lifetime? Well, one way is through physical silver and gold, and I realize that in the Bible it says, well, people will throw their gold and silver in the streets. I understand that, because there will be a time will come when it doesn't matter what you have. But in the transition period, before that time, because we know that there's a lot of time, or there is time, we're not sure how much, but there's time between when things start to go bad and that period of time when, you're going to be throwing stuff in the street and it's not going to matter. But during that period of time, to protect yourself, this is one way to do it. And like I said, you don't have to go out and buy a monster box of silver rounds, and I'm not even sure what a monster box is. I heard that termed. I don't know if it's a crate, but anyway, you can do it little by little, piece by piece. And like I said, just make it a family thing. Just buy silver half dollars, or better yet, buy quarters. I think you've got a better chance with quarters, and even dimes. Look for the pre-1964 dates and keep those. Turn the rest back into the bank, and just keep doing it. Make it a family night. With that, let's go to the phones. Joe.
All right, we're going to go to the phones. We're going to go to area code 682 first. Thanks for holding. You're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report.
Hi, Doug and Joe. How y'all doing?
Very well. Thanks for asking.
Hey, this is Mike from Fort Worth. And first of all, Doug, I wanted to thank you for turning me on to Gary Bell. I love that show.
Cool. Make sure you send him an email. Tell him where you heard him from.
Well, I'm technically challenged. I haven't sent an email for like 10 years. I've only sent one in my whole life, really.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Yeah, he's an interesting, very interesting in terms of the Illuminati and the. To me, he explains complex subjects very well. So I like him.
Yeah, and it was funny that I was talking to a guest I had over at the house the other day, and we were talking about those two boys that were killed by that snake up in Canada. And I had raised boas and pythons back when I was younger, and she asked me why I'd gotten rid of them, and I said because they're cold-blooded. They don't have the capacity for love or feelings or anything like that. And just from my studies, I understand that the Illuminati, part of them have that reptile DNA. Are you still following me, Doug? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. No. I was listening, and reptilian DNA. Yeah, I'm not exactly certain how that works, but I've heard that, and I'm still trying to get a handle on that. But yeah. And it's interesting because you brought that snake up there in Joe and I were talking about that python in Canada about the two children. How does that happen? How does that happen?
Well, they don't have no feelings. They don't know what, if it's an animal, if it's a human being. I mean, to them, they touch something, if they're disturbed, they just lock up and wrap around something and just strangle it until it's dead. And the reason that I brought it up was that that would explain a lot of why they have no capacity for love or empathy or any feelings towards their fellow, what we would call our fellow human beings. They have no conscience. Killing somebody or something, even like the young kids that I believe that they sacrifice.
It's a great point. That is a great point. The lack of empathy, lack of feelings in a reptilian type of DNA situation. Sure, absolutely. Good point.
I just want to make one more point. I'll make room for other people. I'd rather listen to them talk anyway. When y'all were talking about Michael Hastings, it brought to mind that I just can't think of her name right off the top of my head, but there was a real famous columnist in the 60s that was on some game show, and I can't remember that either, but I'm sure you'll remember it. She had brought up
Mary Kilgallen from What's My Line?
That's it. Yep. And she had said that she had some new information that she was going to release on the Kennedy assassination. Am I right on that?
Yes, you're exactly right. In fact, that it was Dorothy Kilgallen. My mistake. Dorothy Kilgallen on What's My Line, and she had supposedly was going to break this big article. In fact, I think she was writing for Vanity Fair at the time, or a publication, in a newspaper as well. And she was found dead in her penthouse apartment in New York City, allegedly of an overdose. And again, that was Dorothy Kilgallen. And folks, you can search that name out and search the circumstances around her death. That's a very good point you brought up, because it's very reminiscent or very similar to what's taking place today, I think, with respect to the death of journalists.
I think that that this has just been going on since Adam and Eve, and that we really people like William Cooper. I'm trying to think. Steve Quayle. I love Steve Quayle, by the way. I follow him everywhere. As a matter of fact, he's the one that brought me to you guys. And for that. I'd love to give him a hug someday.
Well, that's great.
No,
yeah, Steve's a great guy. No, Steve is a great man, and he and Greg Evenson. By the way, Greg Evenson is still, I believe, is still hospitalized. He's still in need of our prayers. So, but yeah, Steve's a great guy. Standeo, others, other people in that truth-telling arena. Yes. Very, very good beacons of truth.
All right, I'm going to let you two gentlemen go. I love you guys. Hey, just watch your back. If you ever need something, but keep my number. I'm just a bouncer and karate instructor, and I've taken care of quite a few people. One day maybe I'll tell you about it. God bless you guys. Thank you.
God bless you too. Thanks for the call.
All right.
We got a guy. He said he was a bouncer, right?
I didn't catch that last part.
Yeah.
It's kind of muffled, but definitely somebody. We will keep your number. We might need it. We're going to move right along here. Area code 626. We're coming to you next. You're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Thanks for holding. What's on your mind tonight?
Doug and Joe, greetings from the streets of Pasadena, and God bless you both. I want to just ask quickly. I have a quick report for you. Am I coming through loud and clear?
You are.
Okay, perfect. Well, gentlemen, before I have a quick sit rep for you here from Southern California, and this is an interesting one. Before I divulge this little tidbit of information, I just want to say quickly, fellow Hagmann and Hagmann member Mary Ann, if you're listening tonight, I want to personally thank you for your kindness, your succinct spiritual insight. She replied after, I think, the last time I participated on the show. And, I've been sort of on this narrative lately about the expanding control grid, if you will, and that can be a very depressing and thought-provoking topic. And she followed my phone call. And, gentlemen, I don't know if you remember the night. It was about a week and a half ago. I felt like she just brought such a spiritual maturity and just really a Christ-like love. I thought her comments were just perfect to sort of punctuate some of the things that I had been mentioning. So, Mary Ann, if you are listening tonight, God bless you. And
she's a precious lady. Yeah, she's a precious lady and an asset to our family. Absolutely.
Amen. Okay, I'll run through this quickly. Doug and Joe, over this past week, I had the privilege of meeting with and interviewing an individual who works here in the greater Southern California area for one of the 3 large medical machine manufacturers. This individual is a well-seasoned sales rep with a huge territory that runs from the central part of the state all the way down to the San Diego area. And I want to be very cautious about, divulging any information that would bring grief to the program, but I will just say this quickly. Joe, several months ago, you were on the trail of this Obamacare thing with regards to our privacy issues. And the interview that I conducted supplements much of what you shared with us back in the March-April area. What I'm speaking about specifically, there are 3 major medical machine manufacturers in the industry currently. Those 3 are Baxter, Alaris, and Philips. Folks, these companies provide all of the equipment that you see in the emergency room or when you visit your physician, et cetera. And what really perked me up, what turned this conversation into more of an interview, gentlemen, was the following. One of these 3 companies that I just mentioned is incurring, quote, a 3.2% tax across the board on everything they sell that goes specifically to the Obamacare bottom line. And with that piece of information, I asked permission to take notes and began doing so. So again, when these machines work like anything else, like everything from stationery for your business to automobiles, they compete. It's supposed to be a free market, and of course competition is supposed to stabilize and even over time drive down the price of these very expensive pieces of machinery. Of course, that price is then shifted off to us in the form of our insurance care premiums, etc. The second thing, so again, that's a 3.2% cost increase all the way across the board for one of these three major manufacturing companies, specifically for the Obamacare bottom line. That's a 3.2 cost increase. Some of these things run hundreds of thousands of dollars, gentlemen. The second thing that I felt the Hagmann and Hagmann family should be made aware of. Folks, some of the insights I hear on this show are just phenomenal. I know there are a lot of you out there that really do your research. This is worthy of taking a couple notes on. There is a piece of equipment called an infusion pump. An infusion pump has traditionally been a way of monitoring medication, particularly when you are in the hospital, recuperating, etc. And up until recently, the infusion pump was monitored by the doctor or the RN on duty. And let's say you're recovering from surgery and you need, pain management, you need your dose of medication. This is an intravenous method whereby at a given time interval you receive your medication. Part of the new Obamacare mandate for these machines, these infusion pumps, is that the infusion pump will be connected via the internet directly to the federal regulatory agencies, and after 2015, these infusion pumps will not only be monitored by the government agencies, but they will, in effect, be able to determine, based on cost analysis, quote unquote, whether or not the patient, in fact, needs a second infusion of, let's say, pain medication, for example. So to summarize this, whereas it used to be a decision between the doctor or the RN on duty and the patient and perhaps the patient's caregiver, when the patient needs a given medication, part of Obamacare is that with these infusion pumps and just a basic internet connection, all of that information will be fed to the government, and then a year later, the government will in fact use cost analysis to determine if the patient is receiving too much medication under Obamacare provisions. And the last thing I want to mention as just sort of a footnote to that, Doug and Joe, is consider, if you will, what Yoda said in the first hour when he was talking about the analysis. He mentioned the 5150.
Yes.
And I would like to add to that what we've discussed over the months about the new different gun control provisions. Let's say, for example, Doug, you were in the hospital and you were there for 2 weeks, God forbid, and you were hooked up to one of these infusion pumps. Your personal medical information regarding something like pain management or maybe an antidepressant is going directly to the government. And I'll pose this as a question, gentlemen. Could they not, in return, deem you, based on the amount of medication you took during a given period of time, to in fact perhaps be 5150? Or perhaps they would deem that you're no longer a responsible gun owner?
Oh. Wow.
Anyway, I'll stay on for a second in case you have any questions. But did what I offered tonight make sense to you, gentlemen?
Unfortunately, it did. Joe's on top of
and,
this.
I want to thank you for expanding on that research. And there's so much that I have that I haven't even disclosed in terms of some of the programs and methods, the capabilities that are already in place, and how they will be used. But the information you shared today sounds very accurate and on point, and it even is more nefarious than that. When you're talking about the insulin pumps and the different devices, because we know there are certain classifications of devices. But yes, you're right. These are the death panels. These are the government to patient care, which is the cost of keeping you alive worth it to the government.
But perhaps these are also marginalization panels, because if you're getting pumped full of, we'll say, happy juice, not necessarily, and pardon that expression, that puts you in a different classification of person. You know what I mean? It would be the equivalent of, we'll say, somebody being prescribed antipsychotic medication, and all of a sudden not worthy or not able to own a weapon.
Yeah, that's very true.
Exactly.
And
if I may quickly,
exactly
gentlemen,
what will happen.
I just want to. There's one other important point. I have to flip the pages of my notes here. Joe, I know how incredibly busy you are, and maybe you could just put this on your pencil this in, because I know you've been all over this topic, and also let me thank you for all of the information that you have gathered and that you have shared with the Hagmann and Hagmann family. I took copious notes back in March and April when you were doing subsequent reports on this, and maybe, Joe, you could look into this for me, because to be honest, I haven't had time to, but this does come directly from the interview. One of the three major companies, Baxter, Phillips, and Alaris, one of them has, with the VA, has effectively used Obamacare provisions to eliminate the competition of the other two companies from a client as large as the VA. And I should add quickly to that, gentlemen, that the last thing that this individual said to me, he or she shook their head and said to me, quote, "Understand this. They are eliminating, under Obamacare, they are eliminating competition across the board. In 1 or 2 years' time, we will see a single company providing, for example, the infusion pumps for everyone." And we know what happens, gentlemen, if you believe in the free market. God knows I do. We know what happens when competition is eliminated. Back in the 1980s, we read stories about the $300 toilet seats in the Pentagon. So I just wanted to mention that quickly, Joe. If you care to look into it, one of these companies has effectively monopolized all of the medical equipment sales to a client as large as the VA.
Interesting.
Well, that's not something I've come across, but I have taken a note of it, and I will look into it. And as soon as I hear something or find something, I will report on it for sure.
Thank you, gentlemen. By the way,
Thank you.
I have been documenting. It's my pleasure, Doug. I have been documenting, per our previous discussion, some of the training and the overflights and what's going on here in LA. I have some excellent pictures. I'm going to give it one more week to see if I can grab a few more, and then I will go ahead and submit those to Mitch.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, we do have a Dropbox there for tips and for photographs, for files, for documents, anything that would help. God bless you. Thank you so much for that, my friend.
Gentlemen,
stay safe
God bless
out there.
you both. I will. Keep up the good work, gentlemen.
All right. Very good.
All
Joe,
right.
before we move on, I just have two corrections to make. Beata, I want to thank you so much. I'm happy to report that Greg Evenson was released from the hospital on Sunday. Somehow I missed that on Steve's site. I apologize. Greg Evenson is out of the hospital, recovering at home, and praise God for that, and thank you, Beata, for that. Also, I referenced a monster box of silver. Obviously, I don't know what one of those are, but Larry, thank you, Larry, for clearing that up. I thought it was just an urban or a kind of a slang term for a whole bunch of silver, but apparently for those wanting to know, a monster box is a box of 500 silver bullion coins, for example, silver eagles or whatever. So that is a technical term that does have a definition, 500 silver bullion coins. For those interested in that, and thank you for both for the clarifications that are made.
All right, moving right along here in our callers. Area code 978, we're coming to you next. You're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report.
Good evening, Doug and Joe. How are you?
Very well.
I want to thank you. It's a great show tonight. I really appreciated the guests and the callers, too. Very informative. But I want to make reference back to an earlier caller that was talking about the 1%, the ruling class, and them being non-sentient and comparing them to snakes. And you've had Dr. Georgia Pugh on your show previously, and her work clearly indicates that, references in the Bible that documents the serpent seed. In Genesis 6, it began for a 400 to 500 year period. In Numbers 13:33, Deuteronomy 3:11, Joshua 12, Psalm 78:49, Numbers 13:28. I could go on. Ephesians 6:12, 2 Thessalonians 2, Exodus 33, John 10. They all make reference to the serpent seed lineage. If you to reference the work, phenomenal work of Zen Garcia, who has a show on Blog Talk Radio, Fallen Angels TV, as well as his YouTube site, Endeavor Freedom, he goes over this subject completely and very easily. It explains it, and it's you cannot deny it. It's in Scripture. But when he made that reference and during his phone conversation on air, I pressed one because I, listening in by telephone and just really felt it necessary to emphasize the work. You've had Dr. George Jeffries Pugh on more than a few times, haven't you?
You know what, caller? I don't believe we have. That name
you haven't?
A bell. No, ma'am.
Okay. I apologize. And I listen to your show quite frequently, and I listen to a lot of the Blog Talk Radio shows. They're phenomenal. And I very much appreciate your show in the Christian vein that you focus on in the show. And Stan Deo, he's been on Zen Garcia's show a number of times, so it's not hard to confuse. Where I may have heard the work because you all share the same guests to a good degree.
That's very true. That's very true. Yeah, your reference to the serpent in the Bible, the Scripture, and the serpent seed, extremely important, I believe, in the context in which it's written in the Bible, and I think it's also important when you take a step back and look at the composition of the Illuminati and look at the various aspects of the powers, the people that hold the power. So you're right in that respect, and So thank you for that clarification.
Well, the New World Order. There's nothing new about it.
That's right.
These are the 1%. It's the serpent seed lineage, and we've been misled. The original sin was not about biting an apple. The fruit of life is children that we bear, and it's a reference to Eve being beguiled by the feathered serpent, fallen angel Lucifer, the Nephilim, or the Nakash, and beguiling Eve, and Cain's father was Lucifer. And, if you look at it that way, and you look at the Bible and the passages that I recited earlier, it makes total sense. And this is the hold that's been on the world. And they control us, and they control the churches, our education, the financial system. And, so I like to say that we don't have economic, political, or social problems. We have but one, and it's spiritual. And, the political, social, and economic, there are symptoms of it. It's a smokescreen to get our attention away from the real problem. Because if we knew the power that we had in Scripture, it's all in there. But then there's the fact of reading it and understanding it, because I've heard it said that the Bible is the Book of Babel, where it has to be, you have to know what you're reading. A big indication of really understanding is the 3 ways that the word Lord, which means master, is spelled. When it is all lowercase, unbeknownst to most people, it's in reference to Satan, the devil. And when it begins with a capital L, that is in reference to the one and only begotten Son of the Most High, who I call Yahushua. And when it's in all uppercase, that refers to Father Most High, Lord God. So when you revisit the Bible with such information, it starts making sense. and I've seen people really grasp Scripture and start to understand it and work it in their life in phenomenal ways by just knowing what they're reading. I think great.
Well, thank you for sharing that information. I suggest everybody go back and read Genesis and revisit that story and do as much research on it as you're led to do by the Holy Spirit. Caller, we got to move on to other callers. I want to thank you for calling in and sharing that tonight. God bless you, and we'll talk to you again soon, okay?
God bless. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, got to get into your Bibles, got to learn what's in there. That is one thing that we definitely need to do as time is short. We need to know what is in there. So not only that we have that knowledge, but we have that understanding and that love for the Lord, and He will guard that information that is inside of us and keep it there, because we were told it can be taken away. And at some point in time, it will be taken away from the hearts of those who don't attempt to understand it. We're going to take one more call here. We got about 8 minutes left of the show. Area code 304. We're coming to you next. You're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report.
Hi, guys. Mr. and Mr. Hagmann, it's a pleasure to speak with you. And I wanted to say, as a veteran, thank you for your service. I don't know if your audience realizes that you are serving your country and your God and putting your lives on the line. And thank you. And it was neat to see that you guys were, the subject was broached, and I love Yoda, love him. But I'm calling about, I've been prompted to kind of come out of my shell here, as I'm sure you have a lot of audience people who, listeners who also realize that, time to speak up is now, and have some information on vaccines. I was a vaccine technician at Fort Detrick. I was a medic in the Army, and I was also in the Peace Corps before that, and I worked in health and sanitation there. And I always wondered, why the women didn't want to come in. The government would offer these free vaccines, and the women wouldn't come in. They didn't want, especially if they were pregnant, they believed that it would make them abort. And then I find out Bill Gates has his thing where he's doing all these vaccines and, with the HCG hormones, so your body creates antibodies to the pregnancy hormones, and you naturally abort. So, yeah, the wives' tale wasn't unfounded there. Oh.
I'm sorry about that.
Oh, yeah. Caller, I just want to ask.
Yeah.
Did you send an email?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
We wanted to bring you on tomorrow. I'm glad you called in.
Oh.
We wanted to talk to you off air and bring you on tomorrow, but you can continue now. We still have a couple minutes left. I was just asking my dad to check the email to see if this was you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I read this email with attention here. Go ahead and continue because our time is short. So.
Okay. Well, all the parents out there, please. I mean, I'm in West Virginia, and we're one of, I think, 2 states that are forced to vaccinate without the religious exemption form. Which any other state, parents, you can get this form. You can simply download it. Dr. Weiner, wine as in wino. It's WINER. He has the exemption form on his website. You can call his office. Just do a search on him, and you'll find that form. You can contact him. He'll mail it to you if you don't want to print it out or whatever. But the other thing I urge people to do is to call, even if you have an appointment set up right now to go get your kids' school vaccines, call into your practitioner and tell them that you want the vaccines to be separated out. Now, the nurse practitioner in the clinic in Germany, I was the one who gave her children the shots. I mean, I've given thousands and thousands of vaccines, all right? I've never made anybody better with the vaccines. The kids all start getting sick after they get their vaccines up to a certain point. I did the well baby exams. I did all that. I just urge you parents to please call your practitioner. I guarantee there's practitioners in that practice who separate out the vaccines. You tell your doctors you want the vaccines given to your children separated instead of the combo vaccines like your DTaP and all that. You tell them you want separated vaccines. You might have to go in a couple different times, but if you are going to vaccinate, which I strongly urge against, tell your practitioner, even if you have to make another appointment, that you want those vaccines separated out. And that's the most pressing thing I can say right now in this short time.
Well, if you don't mind, I was going to be contacting you. Maybe I can do that tomorrow, and we can talk off air for a little bit. And
yeah, I would be happy to share. I got a whole bunch of knowledge up in this head here.
Yeah, and it was just a coincidence that we got to your call tonight. But no, I want to thank you for coming forward and being willing to share some information that could save lives and help families make the right decision when it comes
literally
to
save lives. I mean, this is poison, people. I mean, it's toxic. It's poison, and they're not like they were 30 years ago, 20 years ago, even 5 or 10 years ago. They're different now. They keep adding new ones that aren't necessary, and total overload. But
well, yeah, I want to thank you for your call tonight, and I look forward to talking with you off air, and hopefully we can get you back on the show this week. And I'm not sure how much information that needs to be disclosed, but that's something we will go over. And
okay. Well, thank you,
looking
guys.
forward to it. Thank you, and thank you for calling.
All right, thank you, guys. Thank your audience as well. You guys are awesome. I love all the calls and everything. Appreciate it.
Well thank you, and God bless you. Stay safe.
Have a blessed night,
all right.
and we'll talk later. Thanks.
You too. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye. And now that's somebody that we got information from on just before the show from a very good friend and listener of the show, and they said that somebody would be sending us an email to talk about vaccines. They wanted to come on the air and share their experience, firsthand experience with vaccines. And this is something that we were going to get into tomorrow, try to get a hold of this person and schedule a time to come on the show this week. And maybe we can do that. I'm not sure.
We do
tomorrow, but this information needs to get out.
It does, and let me just put this out to every listener too. We have a method of keeping your identity safe, and we have for situations like this. If you contact Mitch, our producer, via email, that's a very safe way of doing things. Also, a Dropbox, which we're going to be, I'll put this up. It's on Hagmann and Hagmann.com, but I'll be integrating this with our main site, HomelandSecurityUS.com, for documents of critical importance, tips and what have you. So just as an FYI. But this is information that's important to all of us. These callers, Joe, our audience is very learned, very experienced, very plugged in, tuned into what's going on, and we so appreciate that. And I do learn from our guests and from our audience.
Well, I learned so much on a nightly basis, from multiple callers.
Exactly.
And I do need to take more notes. I don't take enough. I have notebooks upon notebooks that are full, but yet still so much information out there. But what is important, just to bring the show to a close as we have about a minute left, is getting your spiritual house in order, making sure that your relationship with the Lord is where it needs to be, because things are changing so rapidly, as we say. We could have 5 years, we could have 5 minutes. We do not know that, so therefore we need to be make sure that we are complete in our relationship with the Lord, or as complete as it can be. With that, I want to say good night to everybody.
And don't forget, Thursday, Steve Quayle and the Guerrilla Economist, a special time, 9 o'clock.
Tomorrow, regular time, 8 p.m.